audience, which I don't seem to think there is any, we will now, first thing, do a roll call.
Okay, Gaffney?
Here.
Stella? Here. May?
Present.
Baker?
Here.
Borstein?
Here.
Thank you.
Now, we will adjourn to a closed session. .30, and we're reconvening after a closed session. We have to report out that the district has reached a tentative agreement with the union, and at our next meeting in April, we intend to present and ratify that agreement with the union. So first, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I screwed up already. I reversed the order. I hope that's okay.
I thought you screwed up the pledge of allegiance.
No, that I got right.
That's good.
Item 5, approval of the agenda for tonight.
I move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Open time for the public to raise items not on an agenda item or for future agendas. Members of the public may address the board regarding issues that are not within Sanitary District Number 1's jurisdiction. The board can hold no discussion during this time. Does
That
any-
are within Sanitary District
That-
Number 1's jurisdiction.
Yeah, that are.
We're-
And what do you
It's
think
a
about
power
that
grab.
new ride at Disneyland? Okay, seeing none, standing committees report out. Finance
Okay, the
Committee.
Finance Committee met on Monday, and we reviewed all of the financial information. We found them in order. Nothing really stood out that we thought was out of ordinary. What we did notice is that our capital expenditures are going up as planned, and so there's a lot of projects underway, and that's something that we've been anticipating. We also reviewed the monthly legal activities, and they continue to be pretty high. We're trying hard to end these lawsuits, but and we've done that, but we still have legal matters. And so our legal is above budget. That's all I have.
Okay, on the HR committee, there again, they've been working very hard on the union negotiations. And so there was nothing really out of the ordinary. I hope everybody is liking these new reports that we're getting on the monthly activities. And one thing that really stood out to me was that the first section of that report is general and individual staff report. That if we had an HR person, these are the things that you would see on an ongoing basis happening within the district, the kinds of services that that person would be providing. The other things, long-range planning and all the others, are things that are projects that hopefully will come and go and stay away. And if you look at that, it says, even though year-to-date, because of many different reasons, which are now documented, we are above our estimate at the beginning of the year, that approximately 43% of our total HR support is done using this general and individual staff items. And which means that really, if we had a full-time, we don't, it says it's about a 0.5 FTE, full-time equivalent. And so, and we'll go over this again at the end, but I think we're doing pretty good, and I really hope that we're gonna begin to see these outside services begin to taper off as we get past the negotiations, the reorganization, and the new policies that we're doing, which are all special items. And that we could see this go away and really be concentrating on a much lower cost of our outside services there. CMSA.
Mary and I attended the CMSA meeting, and nothing really earth-shaking. We're working on a strategic plan, and we're meeting with the same consultant that worked on one of our programs here, and he's preparing an update to the strategic plan. What was interesting is an item that wasn't on the agenda but was in the director's report, and it's a map that's showing sea level rise, 10 inches, 20 inches, 60 inches, etc. Exposed roads, buildings, etc. And when you see the map, we're going to be in some trouble in Larkspur and in our low-lying areas. Santa Fe is in big trouble if this map is true at all. But it's an issue we're going to have to deal with Larkspur, the boardwalk. I don't know, is the Green Bray boardwalk, is that ours or is that Corte Madeira's on the other side of 101?
I think that's Corte Madeira's. right?
Even though it's in the city of Larkspur, it's Corte Madera.
I know it's
so.
Corte Madera.
Right.
Engineer shaking her
Yes,
head.
good.
Is that correct? Okay, thank goodness, because that's going to be a mess down there with sea level rise. But we're going to have our hands full up on this end. So, this is a result of a report of the managers that are just starting this process for Central and more Central Marin. It'd be similar to what they've accomplished or completed for West Marin and for Southern Marin. And it's not a pretty picture at all. Anyway, so that's what we're going to have to look forward to. And as we're working in these areas, we're going to have to come up with the ways to secure our systems to keep the seawater from intruding into our system. I think any contracts that we're putting out, we're going to have to really make sure that the piping we're using can withstand the pressures.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that they did start talking about changing the way we repay the new debt service agreement, moving from EDUs to a percentage. It would only pertain to the most recent bond issue, and they're considering, this was just an informational item, but the staff is, I think prepared to come back to the board at the next meeting with a proposal that the last 7 years of EDU counts be averaged to determine a percentage that each of the JPA member agencies and San Quentin be budgeted to pay. Greg and I had a discussion about this agenda item before I went to CMSA, so that I knew that he was aware of it because it was initially discussed at the managers meeting. But so there will be potentially a change coming down the pike for how we will pay CMSA back for the bonds that we put out.
Okay, thank you.
That's the only thing I would add.
Number 8 is the consent calendar. And does anybody have anything that they would like to pull off the consent calendar tonight?
I'd like to pull the minutes, A.
Sure.
I'd like to pull B, E, and G.
Okay.
D.
A, B, E, and G. Okay, let's look at 8A.
Or do you want to just adopt the consent and then approve the consent that's left and then?
We should go through each and then you can,
Okay.
usually you go through them
Okay.
first and then you come back and have a motion
Okay.
after.
That's fine, that's fine. So on the minutes, from the Wednesday, February 16th meeting, on page 2, it says that after the Pledge of Allegiance, there was no action to report out from the closed session. And actually, there was an action in the closed session. It was a 2-to-1 vote. And It's an item that was concluded, and there's no report of it. That's number one. And the action was, you know, I've been asking that we investigate the possibility of filing a lawsuit against Monsanto for the PCBs that are on the Larkspur Landing property, and that's been being looked at by our attorneys and staff and council and board. And it was concluded at that meeting that we should go no further, and that was a 2-to-1 vote of the board, so that should have been reported out as an action.
Well, actually, if I remember correctly, because we're not exactly against the deadline for that, that you suggested that maybe you had some ideas that could be looked at and thought. I don't know if we should be.
Can I just interrupt? It
Yeah, we
actually
shouldn't- we
isn't
shouldn't be
appropriate to be
discussing
talking
this.
about what we talked about in closed session.
That's,
Right, any
I
of us.
understand, but there was an action taken, it was a 2-to-1 vote. I had asked that.
Can you say that? Should that be
Well,
discussed?
I mean, none of this should be talked about in open
No.
session or
Will it ever
outside
be
of,
talked about?
outside of the closed session.
Will it ever be talked about?
Not
Do I
what
have
we
to file
talked
a
about
ta-
in closed
Do I have to
session.
file a taxpayer suit against Monsanto myself?
All I'm saying is, since we talked about it in closed session, it's not appropriate under the Brown Act to
There
be
was an
talking about it
action
openly.
taken, the board voted 2-to-1 to not proceed with any litigation against Monsanto Corporation.
There are certain actions that are required to be reported out under the Brown Act. I don't believe that a decision to not bring a lawsuit is one of them. The
Really?
decision to actually bring a lawsuit is. I'll look into it, but for now, I'm not comfortable with talking about what we talked about in
The
closed
statute of
session.
limitations that we were advised, one of them at least may expire the 31st of March.
I hear you continuing to talk about it, and I've advised that I don't think that's a good idea.
So the taxpayers are going to be left holding
Now he's talking
holding the
about
bill,
it some more.
holding
Michael, move us on.
yeah, okay.
the bag for Monsanto's PCBs at that site.
I
I'm
suggest
really-
if we want to talk about this after the meeting is over tonight,
I'm really
let's
concerned, but that's
let's
okay. I'll-
I'm happy to talk with you about it after the meeting.
I'll take the
About that.
appropriate action.
Okay.
You may not like it, but I will take appropriate action. I'm not going to stand by and let the taxpayers of the Ross Valley
Okay.
Sanitary
Okay.
District be left holding the bag for up to $5 million of remediation for that site for Monsanto's PCBs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. B, I believe.
Let me finish that. Under item 8, Director Ager asked for item 9D to be removed for discussion. It was actually item 8D. And then in regard to item 9D, it was actually item 8D. That was the consent.
Okay.
So just change the 9 to the 8 in those two locations.
I don't see a problem with that.
And, are you done?
Yes.
I have a point of order for the attorney. When you call in to be in on a closed session, and you're not stating where you haven't done it properly to the Brown Act, I don't think you can be part of the vote, nor can you be part of the discussion. You have to post that 72 hours in advance. So I wanted to question that. I saw that in the minutes.
Right, and what we said in the minutes was, this relates to Director Silla having called into the meeting. We had originally.
That's what I was told
Right,
when I called in from Bali. I couldn't. Go
well,
ahead.
the question you had was related to whether you could call in and be a board member at the meeting, and it was too late to modify the agenda to allow that to happen. Last month's agenda was intended to allow Board Member Silla to call in and participate, but because of a ministerial error, that agenda didn't get posted, and so the language wasn't there. When Mary called in, we made clear to her and on the record that she was not participating as a board member. She didn't participate in a vote, and I did allow her to listen in on closed session. She did not participate in a vote, but since she was she was on the phone and she was calling in.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, perhaps I would have called in too, if I knew that I could only be part of it and listen in. I mean, I wasn't gonna
Right,
do a
and
3-hour meeting coming
right.
from Bali, but I
Right.
knew there was some issues on
Right.
this closed session that were important to me, and I did not.
Right.
Because I was told I had to go from one hospital to another, and I couldn't give you the address I gave you the first address, and the second one wasn't within the 72 hours. I think if you're going to do that with one board member, you got to do them across.
I don't disagree. There was no intent to.
And I may file a complaint. I think that's really sloppy care of the board for our attorney. I'm sorry. but
There
I
was
feel
no
that way.
intent to exclude you at all. I fully intended for Mary to participate as an active board member in that meeting. It wasn't until right before the meeting started that we realized that the correct language was not included on the agenda. So I certainly didn't intend to exclude you, and it was a decision right at that minute that since she was calling in, I suppose she could call in and listen. I don't think it's a practice that should be done on a regular basis by any board member, but I certainly didn't intend to exclude you. And when we emailed about it, you and I did correspond about whether you could call in. I think it was on Monday when we corresponded about whether you could call in as a board member to the meeting. And that was the answer to that question was, we cannot change the agenda in time so that you can call in and participate in the meeting. I didn't understand your question to be, and I didn't think about your question being, could I call in and listen? That didn't occur to me. And on Wednesday when we got here and Mary had called in, I made the decision at the time, well, I guess she could call in and listen. So it was not, by no way did I intend to exclude you, but in the future, I'll certainly think about when somebody can't be here and they're not agendized, whether they could call and listen in. As a general matter, it's probably not a best practice for a frequent thing, because then why couldn't a member of the public call and listen in? So I apologize if it appeared that you were purposely excluded. You were definitely not.
Because I had given my address for within 72 hours. And
I agree, and I still, and that was still,
and I
right.
was going to call in.
That was still, there still was no way we could have included any language on a new agenda.
Okay. And what does the Brown Act say?
The Brown Act says that board members can participate telephonically by teleconference in a meeting under certain circumstances when the agenda is very clear as to where they're at and that location is open to the public. We had that language all set to go for board member Scylla, and it inadvertently was excluded from the agenda. So she could not participate, and she did not participate as a board member,
But
as a
don't you
voting
think
board member.
somebody listening for the whole hour of a closed session where there's no minutes, don't you think that's kind of participating? I feel like this is being, two wrongs don't make it right, and I feel that you're saying that it is right. So we can talk later, but.
Let's talk later. I hear that. I hear the comment.
I don't think it's
I hear the
appropriate.
comment. It's not something the Brown Act addresses, but I hear the comment, and I look forward to talking about it.
Okay, so moving on, are you done, Frank?
Well, on those minutes, just the very last page 6 of 6 of the minutes, that Director Ager asked if CIFAC could be compelled to reimburse Ross Valley Sanitary District for legal fees, and Council Clark said she would check. That was on the appeal that, when it went up on appeal, and we actually prevailed.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get a chance to?
I did. I
check that
checked
out?
with counsel on that, and the answer was that no, it wouldn't be possible. I'd be happy to get more information on that and talk with you about it outside or afterward. I didn't inquire as to all of the legal basis for whether attorney's fees could or couldn't be, but I did check in with our counsel, with Berliner Cohen on that and ask that question.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
8E.
No, B.
Oh, I'm sorry. 8B, adopt,
Wait,
accept
wait,
interim
wait,
financial
hold on.
statements.
Yeah.
Good job.
Okay, page 2 of 8. So I'm looking at our budget for line 16 on the community outreach. So I don't think 120,000 is there. I was trying to find how much is left in that. Do you know, Julie? I couldn't find, or is it a
Year
100?
to date.
Both of us there.
Look at year to date.
Okay, so my concern on this is, it's been sitting there since July, right? Right? And I've asked repeatedly, there is a outreach committee, I don't think we've ever met. We have the public's money sitting there. There's so much that needs to be done, I think, with educations, even if it's around spills. And the money's just sitting there. So we either do something, this is now March, the money will be, what is it, June, May? May is when we start looking at our new budget. Or we allocate it for some other service for the community. So I just wanted to point that out when the finance committee meets, maybe next time.
Well, that's not a finance committee problem, that's a public outreach situation.
I've told Greg off and on that we need to do some projects, but we don't go anywhere.
So just to address that, so we have expended, I think this is 1 month
This is not
today.
correct, right? We've spent some?
We've spent about, just under 30,000, between about 27.
Is that on the
$30,000.
newsletter? Newsletter? Is that where the money comes
It's
from?
we have a whole series of rotating ads running in the Pacific Sun and in the Marin IJ. And also we have a series of 4 rotating online banner ads dealing with laterals, advice on flushables, or what not to flush, and proper disposal practices. So we actually have managed to get a fair amount of uptick in that activity, and we do have we've backed up to a quarterly, but we have a quarterly newsletter, and those are kind of the key things right now. So yes, we recognize that we haven't achieved the level of activity on community outreach that we'd like.
Okay,
So we're still moving that direction.
okay. What, the ads in the newspaper, what's it on, is it on the laterals?
There's a series of them. I think the topics are the financial assistance for the lateral replacement.
Okay.
And the other is basically the improper disposal, don't put these things, down your drains.
Mhm.
And I forget what the third topic is, but there's a series of, I've already seen at least 2 of them online just in the past
Mhm.
week or so on the IJ website. So it's a combination of those topics,
Mhm.
Pam.
Yeah, and I do want to report, because I work at the hospital, that this week, they actually now are changing all how we dispose medications.
Mhm.
So, and a lot of it is research that's coming from wastewater, a lot of it from wastewater and drinking
Mhm.
water. So I wanted to say that there are changes happening in the community. Okay, moving on to the long sheet, it's just the only one. When you have at the bottom on number 50, cash requirements, can you just define that? What that means? Is that what we need to pay the bills? Or?
Yeah, each month the cash requirements are what is required to run the district for that particular month. And then if you look at cumulative for year to date, it's saying that we're gonna need $6.8 million. Or that actually, yeah, that we're gonna be using $6.8 million.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to consent calendar item. Fingers. G.
No, it's
E, I'm sorry, I'm always one ahead.
E.
Adopt the resolution identifying go ahead.
Okay, so I want to backtrack. This had to be pulled anyway because there's a resolution in it, but
No, it doesn't.
it doesn't?
No, because we could do a roll call vote.
We can do a resolution on a consent?
If we do a roll call vote,
Oh, if you
Right.
do a roll call?
Yeah.
But how can you do a roll call on a consent if it's?
Well, you can do
just
you would do a
you
roll
just-
call on
okay.
the
All
entirety
right,
of the
anyway,
consent.
okay. So this is the one, and Frank, I might need your help to help my memory. So we used to sign for all the paychecks, correct? In the past,
Who's we?
the board, or a couple of board members, the secretary and a couple were designated in the past.
It may have been before you were here.
I don't
It's
know.
before you were here.
that.
So this is now saying we can.
It's not
No.
saying who cannot sign checks, it's updating, and it's virtually identical to our, at least the last 3 years of policy and practice, as to who has check signing authorization at the district. The only thing that this is changing is it's updating the job titles, the job classifications that were eliminated by the board last month and are being replaced with 3 new job classifications. So all it's doing is transferring that check signing authority from those 3 old positions where it resided to the 3 new positions effective April 4th, which is when those 3 new job classes come into effect and the old one sunset.
Okay,
So
okay. All right. Maybe I'm getting this mixed up with the next one. Okay, and then on G, the last one, is that G, is that a G? Yeah. I had a question about this. This is just so that the staff and the attorney can put together these new documents, right? For the position reallocation.
Well, it's related to the position reallocation, but not quite. This is related to the topic we just mentioned. When we did the position reallocation, in hindsight, and Andrea and I have talked about this for future activity, we should have included some type of blanket language that, again, transfers, in a sense, all of the responsibilities or authorities of those old positions to the newly created positions. So the resolution we just discussed, that affected that change for the check signing authority, which was the first thing we identified because, surprise, we are always signing checks, and that became apparent that we were going to hit that April 4th limit. So what this is meant to do is simply avoid any, what I'll call sort of procedural snags, where if we're taking an action, you know, a month or 2 from now, when we have a staff person acting in one of these new roles, there's no confusion about, well, Ordinance X says that that authority resides with the finance manager. And at this point, we no longer have a job classification of finance manager. We have this new job classification. So this is intended to allow staff with, you know, with legal counsel coordination to simply, as we find those necessary changes, because they're embedded in a wide range of district documents, for us to simply update those administratively and virtually no change in our basic business. But it does avoid what we've already run into and we can foresee, which is there are certain actions and authorities tied to those job titles, and we just want to transfer them to the new job titles.
Okay. But you will be making changes?
Almost certainly, yeah. There's many documents that reference positions, which is a practice we may want to get away from in the future, but it is what we have right now.
Okay, and it'll come back to the board. It says it's a draft, and then we'll vote on it. This is not voting on the changes itself. This is this, you can go ahead and create a draft.
No, that's not correct.
It
You are
says
authorizing staff to, as we find these administrative revisions in these various documents, you'd be authorizing us to update those documents and insert the new job classifications. That's all.
Okay, well,
Am I
in
explaining
the
that
discussion,
correctly?
it says council has advised staff to draft a resolution for the board's.
And-
I understand the resolution, okay. All right. I think that's all I have.
Okay, so, we need to go ahead and vote on the consent calendar. It's got to be a roll call because there are a couple of things that require a roll call. So,
I'll move the consent calendar.
I second.
Is that with the changes in the minutes?
yes.
Okay. Gaffney?
Yes?
Scylla?
Yes.
Meigs?
Yes.
Mager?
Aye.
Borstein?
Yes. Okay, let's dive into presentation and discussion of the remediation work plan concepts for 200 Larkspur Landing Circle.
So I'll do a very brief introduction, and there's a typo I noticed. I think there's somewhere we might refer to it as 200. It's 2,000 Larkspur Landing.
Oh, right there.
It's generally we got it, but that one slipped through. So what this is this evening for the board, it's strictly a discussion item. And we have Todd Miller here from Kennedy Jenks. And the purpose of this item and bringing it to the board at this point is the board gave staff direction at the last time we discussed this topic to go forth with developing what we call a draft work plan for an approach to the remediation of the Larkspur Landing parcel that would comply and meet the requirements of the federal regulations that are set and administered, in this case, by the EPA, and specifically the EPA Region 9 staff in San Francisco. So we have started that direction, and we have the technical team continuing work. We, about 6 weeks ago, I think it's referenced in here, February 4th, we had a very constructive and quite lengthy discussion with the key EPA staff in San Francisco, where we went through our proposed approach on what is termed the self-directed remediation methodology, if you want to call it that. And one of the key outcomes of that meeting was a consensus direction from EPA, and we don't think it's necessarily unreasonable, it just creates some trade-offs, to actually shift to what is called the risk-based remediation approach. And Todd can go into this in more detail, but we have talked about this a little bit in the past. And at the risk of a huge oversimplification, the federal regulations addressing this type of PCB remediation, essentially they establish those two basic directions. You can approach it from a risk-based methodology or a self-directed, and Todd can explain more about what those mean. But we feel like we have good direction from EPA staff, and the technical team is making progress, and we felt like this would be a good junction to basically check in with the board, let you know what's happening, and we anticipate another meeting with EPA staff probably within the next hopefully no more than 3 to 4 weeks, to bring them back our updated technical work and see if we can, at that meeting, our objective is to leave with consensus direction on the remediation approach, and that would allow us to finalize what is called the work plan. And think of the work plan as essentially the document that we use to actually go out and undertake the remediation by hiring the right group of contractors and specialists to conduct the remediation. So we are getting, I think, one step at a time closer to being able to take meaningful action on the site towards the board's established goal of unrestricted land use for that site, and that remains a fundamental objective of the remediation approach. So I'm going to hand it over to Todd, and he is going to walk through the presentation, which you also have a copy of in your package.
We can turn down the lights. Yeah.
Pardon me?
Oh, we can turn down the lights a little bit. There we go. She's got it.
There they go.
President Borstein, board members, thank you for your time this evening. My name is Todd Miller. I'm a geologist with Kennedy Jenks Consultants. We've been working with Ross Valley for several months, and I actually got involved in this project many years ago at the time of the lawsuit, just for a few weeks to help support that effort, so I do have a little more history on the project. But I'd like to present to you just a very brief summary update of where we stand, as Greg mentioned, on the remediation planning for the 2000 Larkspur former wastewater treatment plant. I'd like to take you through just a very quick summary of what the impacts to the site are, a brief discussion or a brief presentation of the outcome of the US EPA meeting, which occurred on February 4th, what that means for the path forward for this particular project. There are some additional areas to characterize for the site, so we'll talk about those very briefly and why. What the remedial activities will include in general, what the timeline looks like, and then any answers, discussion, questions. And I would like to say that throughout this presentation, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to stop me and ask. I don't want this to be a very interactive, informal, no reason to wait till the end. If something pops into your mind, please ask me to stop. So just to orient everybody, this is a air photo off Google Earth of the facility. The orange dashed line represents the site boundary. As you can see, most of the site is graded and undeveloped. The lower, the southwest portion of the site is currently being used by Ross Valley for a field construction yard. This is the layout of the former wastewater treatment plant, basically where an overall footprint of where the buildings were. The black lines represent where major structures are, and those are also locations where when they demolished the structures, they ended up with holes in the ground, excavations, if you will. And so what we have here is a site boundary. What is in blue are what we call the limits of construction. That's where this construction activity took place, and I'll describe that in a minute. And then in 2012, through the process of a lot of emergency actions and construction that Ross Valley goes through on an annual basis and a project basis, they tend to purchase soil in bulk when they need to backfill a hole for a quick emergency or whatnot. They'll have some leftover soil from that project. So over the years, they tended to stockpile that soil at this facility, and in 2012, they regraded that for stormwater protection and general site maintenance. So you have this regraded area that's represented in yellow. You've got the blue area, which is the limits of construction backfill, and we'll go through that in a minute. And then just a very simplified cartoon cross-section in the lower right-hand corner of what we're going to call concrete debris. So the demolition process included demolishing the plant structures, crushing the concrete, and using that crushed concrete as backfill, which is not uncommon. That's a very common thing to do, so you don't have to haul it off-site. Then they imported some soil to bring the site back to grade, and then they regraded the site in 2012 with other material that they had. So at the time of demolition, the black dashed line represents what the original soil surface looks like. And these are not by any means accurate to elevation. These are representations of what occurred on site in the past. So what I'm looking at here is that cross-section AA prime, just as an example. It doesn't span the entire site, it's just a portion through the construction area. So we have the limits of the demolition activities and the native soil. And you can see that that entire construction area was dropped down by a few feet to get rid of a lot of the buildings and the surface material. And then they excavated these structures and left large holes in the ground. The next step was to use the crushed concrete to backfill the excavations and portions of the site. And they didn't have enough material at that time to complete bringing the site back into grade, so they imported some soil and they brought that soil up to grade. Where the problem lies is the concrete that was crushed came from the plant buildings. The plants were painted with a material that happened to contain PCBs. It was unknown at the time that the paint material contained PCBs, but that has since been figured out. The import material, for whatever reason, and it's not well documented, but as they sampled the site for characterization, they found that some of this import material also contains PCBs. That could be residual dust left over from construction of the site. It could be material that was brought in from an unknown source. I don't know the history of that material, so I can't answer those questions. Following the regrading of the site, in working with DPSC, there were some investigations and remediation work that was done. They went out there and excavated contaminated soil that was relatively high in PCBs. Then they backfilled with clean material. So you have these pockets of clean material out of the site as well. And then in 2012, we added more clean soil to the top to regrade the site to what it looks like today. So if we look at the plan view, this is kind of what you end up with from the documents that we can generate. You've got a layer that's roughly 0 to 2 feet or 0 to 4 feet. That's the orange and yellow layers. That's the material that's more widespread throughout the construction area. And then somewhere between 4 feet and 20 feet is the deepest excavation. You have these red areas, and those are areas that are backfilled with the crushed concrete. And the crushed concrete may also be part of that yellow layer as well. But the red represents the deeper crushed concrete areas. So we had a meeting with EPA on 4th of February this year, and we had walked in and wanted to approach them with a self-directed remediation work, or with a self-directed remediation approach. And self-direction is pretty straightforward. It's prescribed in the regs. It's 40 CFR 761.61A. If you ever can't fall asleep, please pick it up and read it. Through discussions, EPA strongly urges to consider the risk-based remediation approach. And EPA likes the risk-based remediation approach because it provides them flexibility. So typically when you talk about a risk-based remediation approach, what you're talking about is, well, we don't want to excavate to perfectly clean, we don't want to excavate to some health value that EPA says is appropriate. We want to gauge the risks for that individual site, adjust the concentration, the remedial goal, to that level and remediate accordingly. There's also another way to look at it, and the way EPA is looking at it is the risk-based also in TSCA regs allows you to vary the level of sampling that you're doing for each one of these individual units. So how much do you have to sample to haul off the waste and characterize the waste? How many samples do you have to collect per cubic yard of material? How many samples do you have to collect per square foot of area excavated? EPA has a little more flexibility on what they can approve. Under the self-directed, it's very prescribed. You will do X. And EPA might say, yeah, that's all good and fine, but they would prefer to actually have some input and make sure that any of their concerns are addressed. So they're recommending the risk-based approach. What I want to clarify is we've talked with Ross Valley about it. We still intend to excavate or plan to excavate down to the US EPA level of 0.24 milligrams per kilogram. We're not approaching this as a risk-based from a health-based perspective. We're in agreement with the risk-based approach if EPA will allow us flexibility on how we characterize the soil for disposal, how we characterize the site once it's clean. Those are the types of things that we're looking at as the advantages when we're risk-based as EPA is put. So, yeah, go ahead.
What happens if they change their rule and make it 0.1 milligrams per kilogram? Is that parts per million, isn't it? 0.2 parts per million?
Parts per million, roughly, yes.
What if they go to 0.1 part per million? In the future?
You mean in the future, sometime in the future? As long, you answer a very sticky question. In the environmental realm, any agency can come in and reopen any site for any reason. But generally, when a site is agreed to at a work plan stage or a remediation stage, to agree to clean up to a certain level, as long as you're actively cleaning up and you reach that level, the agencies will close that site, as long as we're not talking 20 years down the road. Sites with, the VOC contaminants, TC and PC are great examples. Those health-based values have changed over the years, have gone up and down. A lot of sites that were previously closed have never been reopened because they were closed under a certain standard. Sites that are still active, the agencies come in and say, well, now you've got to reach this standard, or as with PCE, the standard went up. It's no longer 5, it's now 25. So if it were to happen to change for some unknown reason between now and 3 months from now, yeah, we would have to address that with the agency.
But if it's later? If
it's 10 years down the road, likely they're going to come back and look at it, and hopefully 10 years from now, the site's redeveloped, and there's not going to be much that they can do. But, I mean, 0.24 right now is a very conservative health-based value. But that's a very fair question. Yeah.
Quick question, go ahead.
So, is there any risk to the taxpayer with this proposal? Any risk at all? Is it zero risk?
I don't think there's anything out there that's zero risk, but can you define what you mean by risk? I mean, right now the cost is uncertain, so that's a risk to.
So we don't have any cost with any of these. There's no cost allocation. We have no idea.
Engineer's cost estimate has not been yet developed, and that can't be developed until we have an agreement with EPA as to exactly what the work is. I can give you an estimate, but it's likely to be wrong. I mean, but I'm not even prepared to go there tonight. But yeah, I mean, 3 months from now, when we prepare the proposed work plan, we will be discussing cost with Ross Valley of what we think this work plan will ultimately cost the agency. And then the volume of soil you have to remove and dispose. If it's, if we estimate 10,000 yards or 20,000 yards and it ends up being double that amount, obviously the cost will go up because we can't confirm the site is clean until we reach the .24 at every location we sample.
So 0.24,
That's total PCBs, not so PCBs are a group of chemicals.
okay.
So .24 is a total value. So you add up all the sums of all the various congeners and .24 would be the total.
So this could be developed for residential?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
.24 is the residential value.
Okay. For instance, it's Hamilton, they built homes out there, and the condition is they can't go in the ground, I think, any deeper than 1 foot to dig, because it was a brownfield site.
Correct.
Will this have any of those kind of
Yeah.
limitations?
That's the whole point, is we want this site clean to the point where anybody could literally do anything they wanted with the site.
And-
You could approach it from that perspective, and that gets you back down to that risk-based remediation approach.
When we're finished with this process, there'd be no chance that 10 or 20 years down the road, they're gonna find something, and who's ever living there at the time is gonna sue the district on the basis of what was discovered, say, 20 years from now.
I can't tell you, I can't predict the future. I honestly can't. We find new chemicals every day and problems with chemicals every day. What I can tell you is, at the end of the day, there are a host of chemical concerns that are associated with the site, and most of those were remediated and cleaned up and closed under DTSC's guidance. EPA got involved when PCBs became an issue. So PCBs are the only problem left on site. So there's been issues with heavy metals, with TPH, no VOCs that I'm aware of, but there have been PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, TPA, total petroleum hydrocarbons, which are usually associated with each other, metals, wastewater treatment plant operations from sludge disposal. So those types of chemical contaminants have been known to be associated with the site, but those were all closed out by DTSC in 2006.
Okay. So, a number of wastewater agencies are having issues with PCBs. And Oakland, Berkeley, and San Jose have filed lawsuits against Monsanto, the manufacturer of PCBs. I believe those 3 agencies are talking liquid PCBs, and ours are solid. We don't know if they've been able to, if they've moved towards the bay or not, towards the ferry terminal, if they've migrated at all. But can you guarantee they have not migrated? None of the PCBs on our site have moved off-site?
I cannot guarantee that, no. The reason I can't guarantee it is because these are solid state PCBs. They are not in a liquid form. They are not mobile in the current environment, except when that soil particle gets picked up by rainwater and transported somewhere. If it contains PCB, it may go off-site. So one of the things that EPA is asking, and we'll get to it in a minute, is that we look at there's a drainage swale on the east side of the site. And they want that drainage swale investigated to see whether or not there's a potential to answer your question.
So if this was your site, would you be looking at Monsanto for some liability here?
I'm not an attorney, I can't answer that.
I'm just asking, if it was your personal property, and you found there were PCBs on your site, would you think, should the manufacturer of those PCBs hold any responsibility, do you think?
I'm not prepared to answer that, I'm sorry. It's too much of a risk of a question.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of insurance where agencies do a cleanup and then they insure against future challenges? Or, like for instance, if the standard changes and they find something that goes down to 0.1 or something?
I have not dealt with insurance companies on future liabilities. We deal quite a bit with insurance companies that will insure the remediation process. So if we come in and we say it's, give you a number off the top of my head, maybe it's $3 million. And the insurance company might look at it and go, well, what's the risk? The risk might go to $10 million, okay? So they'll write you a policy to cover $5 million to $10 million for X value of dollars. Cherokee, AIG, and a few others are big in that environment. But I've not dealt with any insurance companies that will insure you against future lawsuits or future liabilities, no. That could be out there, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, I heard that right.
Is this considered a brownfield site?
In general terms, it could be, yes, because it's a contaminated, underutilized site, so it meets the definition. But because it's going to be remediated to an endpoint that will allow it to be used for any particular reason, it's more of an industrial remediation site. But it could be viewed as a brownfield site. Typically, when you remediate a brownfield site, you're remediating it to some restricted standard, if you will, because you want varied use. So, Emeryville is a perfect example of brownfield redevelopment. Most of the city of Emeryville is on contaminated soil, but you'll notice a lot of Emeryville is developed with shops on the first floor and residents on the second, third, and fourth to keep the residents away from that contamination.
It was naval, there were naval shipyards there.
No, it was more manufacturers. There was a refinery there, there was a bulk terminal, there was a paint manufacturer, Sherwin-Williams, a lot of refinery industrial waste in that area. A lot of solvent manufacturers too. Any questions about the EPA proposed or recommended approach? Any additional questions?
Well, yeah, risk-based implies that there's risk.
Risk-based implies that you are evaluating the risk relative to the reward, yes.
Okay. And what is the self-directed? What would we have to do if it was self-directed?
The self-directed would require that you excavate all of the soil, and then there's a certain procedure to characterize the soil. You would have to excavate it, you would have to characterize it, and then on a 1.5 meter grid, you would have to go in and collect confirmation samples every 1.5 meters, so every 3 feet, 3 feet across the entire area of your excavation.
It's self-directed because the standards are here, and so you can like do it yourself and check the boxes.
The nice thing about the self-directed, and one of the reasons we were originally recommending it with Ross Valley, is exactly that. You have to notify the agency you're going to do it under self-directed. You have to provide them a summary of your work, but as long as you comply with the regulations, the agency doesn't get involved until you've actually done and they look at your report and say, okay, yeah, you've collected all these samples in the right locations. You've done all that. You could choose to work with them throughout the process, but it doesn't require you to do so. The risk-based remediation approach does require that you work with the agencies throughout the process to make sure things are proceeding correctly and that the agency is happy with where you're collecting samples, how you're excavating material, how you're characterizing the cross-site disposal. So it's a little more interaction with the agency, and given the interactions we had in 2015, we were trying to minimize that.
Would self-directed remediate to 0.24 to the same level?
Yeah, that would be the only choice you have under self-directed.
Yeah.
So risk-based, you can go to that, but it may be up or down depending
You
on.
can go higher and you can develop it as just an industrial site. For example, if you wanted to extend that shopping mall, if you wanted it to just be a shopping mall, you could go higher than 0.24. The advantage and disadvantage, the advantage of going to 0.24 is you've done the best job available to get as much of the contamination out as economically or practically possible without digging to solid earth and removing an inordinate amount of soil. At the same time, you are remediating down to a level that is deemed by USEP to even be acceptable for kids to play on. I mean, that's what that 0.24 level represents.
And the reason that they're strongly suggesting risk-based, I mean, I'm a little cynical, is it because then they're, it keeps them in business, not that the US EPA needs to be worried about keeping it in business, but.
I have a hard time answering that question because what they have told us basically is we really think you ought to do this under a risk-based approach. It would be better for you.
Okay.
Is that, I mean.
They like Greg.
No, I think that's it. I mean, we have varying technical opinions. Our team had its initial recommendation. And we had, like, so, we were there for a couple hours on this topic, and I think Todd summarizes it well. It wasn't a matter of, because of this, this, and this, you should do the risk-based. It was really just kind of put forth as a, as a repeated position from their staff. I mean, I would understand that to have some underpinnings. They're pretty familiar with the site. We've worked with them on and off for the last couple of years. But I think it's fair to say they didn't go into a lot of, background as to why that was their recommendation, but they were very consistent about it, I would say.
I will say that EPA, 4 years has been a very difficult agency to deal with. Things take a very long time. They have started a new program recently where they are trying to expedite a lot of remedial activities, because they understand that they're in part the problem with getting a lot of sites remediated. And in part that new program is structured in a way that it provides them to be a partner on your job, not necessarily the gorilla pounding the hammer. So I think one thing that they're looking at is they want to approach it from a partnership and really provide us, from their perspective, what the best approach forward is based on the regulations. And I will tell you that the EPA project manager, Carmen Santos, knows TSCA regulations very well. So
would it be better for us or better for them? Risk-based.
I think it's better for everybody. When we look at it from the perspective that the EPA is now asking us to look at. As long as we can reach an agreement with EPA on the work plan of exactly what the scope is, and that was the problem we had last year, is we could not come to an agreement on what the scope needed to be for the interim use. I think now that we're approaching it from a remediation perspective, we will work through the technical details of how many samples and where and how much material gets excavated, how it gets excavated, how you characterize it, where it's going to be disposed. All of that will be worked out as part of the work plan, such that when the work is implemented, it's relatively straightforward. And the board can issue a request for proposal to contractors. They can bid on it. They can be pretty certain as to what the work will do.
We were talking about a parking lot and putting sidewalks in, and
correct.
Boy, they were putting conditions on that like it was going to be almost impossible for us to develop a parking lot there with sidewalks. So.
Correct. There wasn't a meeting of the minds as to what we wanted versus what they needed. They thought for some reason that they believed they needed a better characterization of the site while it's being used as a parking lot, or even before it got used as a parking lot, and that was never the intent. And so that's why it was problematic.
Wait, can I go?
Yeah.
Just real quick. When we first talked about this about 6 months ago, we approved a little bit of a budget to have this done. And I see here on the remediation timeline, I may be pushing it a little bit. Are we still within our budget? Are we going to have to, is there going to be a new budget requested for the work that that needs to be done as far as work plan preparation and all that? Are we within budget, or?
I can address that at least partway, Michael. So we have, we had a line item, we had monies in this year's budget, the current fiscal year budget, to support the ongoing technical work, and it was basically a placeholder value. The costs to date this year in terms of developing the work plan and engaging EPA and so forth have been quite minimal, I think, relatively speaking. We're still, I think, well below $30,000 at this point. We are anticipating, this is a very broad number at the moment, but to get us to where, say, in approximately 2 to 3 months from now, we have submitted the updated work plan and have had a couple of meetings with EPA to seek final approval on that. Our estimate right now is that still, we can get there within about a $50,000 cap, which is what the board had provided for when you gave direction on this last time. So at the moment, this level of effort, and certainly through the remainder of this fiscal year, which ends in June, this will not be a large expenditure item, relatively speaking, for the district. Once we have as Todd has mentioned, the approved work plan, then our level of certainty goes up, you know, tremendously to look at what it actually takes to implement and carry out the remediation. And at that point, we would definitely, you know, we'd be sitting down with the board and talking about what that means in terms of budget resources, but we don't have a number. And to look ahead just a little bit, as we develop the draft budget that starts in July of this year for the new fiscal year, most likely we're going to attempt to put some type of a placeholder number in there that at a minimum let us get started on these activities. But until we have an approved work plan from EPA, we do not have an answer as to what this costs. I mean, I think that's.
And Greg is correct. We're constantly looking at the budget and are we going to get there within our allotted budget. I will say with one caveat, we think we're going to get there, but the next EPA meeting where the technical team is working on really kind of I'll allude to it here a little bit in the presentation, this is what we want to do. Here's our proposed scope. If EPA looks at it and goes, yeah, that sounds reasonable, write it up, then we're on a good path. But if EPA puts us in a tailspin and says, no, that's not reasonable, you need to shift gears and do X, Y, and Z, it may take some more money to change that direction and give EPA what they need. So we're trying to arrange a meeting with EPA for early April. That way by May we can come back to the board and say, this is what EPA told us. This is what we think, this is where we're going, and we'll have a more clear answer on at least getting the work plan approved. And then once the work plan is approved, that's when Ross Valley can go out for a bid and really get some hard contractor numbers.
If the strength, for the soil, it's really high strength, like say 0.5 milligrams per kilogram, where would you truck that?
Well, anything, that's a really good question, and that's a debate we're having with EPA right now. So there are two options for disposing of the material. You can go to three options really. You can go to a TSCA or a REPRA landfill, which is very expensive, and it'll either be Button Willow or somewhere in Utah, depending on who can accept it and what they can accept. And that depends on the landfill's permit. So every landfill has a permit that says you're allowed to accept these wastes in these concentrations.
Is it a class 1 landfill?
It would be a class 1 landfill. A TSCA or a REPRA landfill would be a class 1. The other option is if we characterize it for some other unknown reason, it happens to be a non-REPRA or non-USEP, non-federal hazardous waste, what they call a California waste. Then it would have to go to a California hazardous waste facility, which is right now Kettleman Hills, Button Willow, and there's a third one I can't remember.
What was the first one?
Kettleman Hills.
Kettleman.
Yeah. Button Willow, and there's a third one in California, and I don't recall the name of it. It could go there at a much reduced rate over the REPRA landfill. Typically, anything less than 50 milligram per kilogram is a non-TSCA waste or a non-REPRA waste. And so that can go into literally a landfill that's permitted to accept it, a solid waste facility. So someplace like Vasco Road or Hay Road landfill up in Fairfield, if they would accept that waste, could.
Okay.
So it depends on, and that's one of the things.
So it's a huge variable, isn't it? That's a huge variable for cost.
That's a very huge variable, and that's one thing that we are talking with EPA right now is how many samples do you need to characterize? Because EPA has a standard, and the landfills have a standard, and we need to make sure when we put the work plan together that we meld the tubes so we get enough samples so we can characterize the material with respect to the landfill. What we know today is it's all non-hazardous waste.
Okay.
So in record, there's only been one sample that exceeded the TSCA limit, and that's when EPA got involved. Any other questions?
Are you going to finish up the slides, or?
I'm going to finish the slides.
Okay.
We didn't let him.
And most of them we probably already talked about. So real quick, the path forward is we need to identify areas requiring further characterization. I'll show those in a minute. Then prepare the work plan. We'll use the approved work plan to prepare the contractor bid package and then send it out for bid. Characterize the site. The contractor will then be responsible for characterizing the site, implementing the remediation, and preparing the report. That report then goes to US EPA, and presumably if it's carried out the way it's written in the work plan, the report goes to US EPA. US EPA looks at it and goes, yes, you're done, we'll give you a no further action letter. The characterization and the remediation could be done separately. characterization before remediation. It could be done by two separate contractors. It all depends on how it wants to be, how Ross Valley wants to bid it out and contract it out, and you know, get relative to different contractors proposing on those stages of work. So the areas that still need to be characterized. So on the west side of the property, in the blue line, you'll see the sidewalk area. So that's an area where Ross Valley would like to make some improvements. They'd like to add a sidewalk to that area, some permanent fencing. EPA has already come back and said, we don't have a problem with that. Just characterize the soil right beneath that, what they call a permanent structure. A sidewalk represents a permanent structure. So characterize that soil. Once you characterize it, come back to us, show us it's not a problem, or show it if you have a problem, you've remediated that small problem, and then you can put in your sidewalk. So that particular scope of work could occur really at any time. The larger blue area, the limits of construction, what needs to be characterized there is that clean soil that's on top. So we can grade that material off at the very beginning, stockpile it separately, and use it as clean backfill. Additionally, the clean excavation, or the excavations that were backfilled with clean soil as part of the remediation, we'd like to excavate that material, characterize it, ensure it's clean, and set it aside for future use as backfill. If we characterize it and it turns out it's not clean, then it's got to be hauled off with the rest of the material. So that's an area that needs to be characterized. The third part is what I heard in the question earlier, is the drainage swale on the east side of the property. So most of the stormwater either soaks into the ground or drains to the east, and there's a drainage swale that runs along to the east to a catch basin on the south side of the property. We would collect, I believe right now, our work plan says 9 samples along that drainage swale and analyze those for PCBs. In addition, there are some storm inlets in the center of the site where we would inspect those drop basins and look for sediment. If sediments in those, we would sample the sediments to see whether or not those sediments, collecting the sediment runoff from the site, actually contain PCBs. And then from there, you know, if there's an issue with what's in the drainage swale, that can be handled separately from the remediation. Obviously, the drainage swale will be part of the remediation project, but anything at the catch basin, anything off-site, could be handled as a separate issue. So it doesn't have to stop remediation, construction, development of the site itself. So the investigation areas are the sidewalk, the drainage swale, and the construction backfill area. We'd excavate the clean surface materials and stockpile on site, excavate the PCB impacted soils. There are a couple of ways to do it. Right now, what we're proposing is we want to excavate in 1-foot lifts, put that material directly into a truck, and have it hauled to the correct landfill. So that's going to depend on some coordination on you sample a lift, you start hauling it off, you get it all hauled off, you sample the next 1-foot lift, things like that. EPA, I don't think is totally on board with that process. So it's a matter of us sitting down with EPA and hashing out the details of how we want to characterize this waste process disposal. So we characterize each lift, and then after everything's excavated, we would come back in and collect confirmation samples for 761 point, subpart R, I think. But
What's the issue? Why don't you, they have standards that you don't like, or
with the confirmation, you
with
mean,
the 1-foot lifts? You're saying that they're not like that, or what's the issue?
EPA does not like, currently is not totally thrilled with characterization in place. So if you read Part A, the self-directed remediation, and this is why, one reason EPA is suggesting we go risk-based. 761.61A dictates that you characterize stockpiles. And so what you would have to do is excavate this material, lay it out on site, characterize it, then pick it back up, and haul it off. So it's actually 3 separate handling modes. We would rather characterize a 1-foot lift and then haul it off, and then characterize the next 1 foot. So you're only handling the soil once. It seems like a minor engineering technical issue, but EPA is looking at the regs saying this is what the regs say. And they don't have a choice. If that's what the regs say under self-directed, then that's how you would handle it. But if we go with the risk-based remediation, they have that flexibility to negotiate how that is handled. And we collect confirmation samples, backfill with clean imported material, obtain the no further action, and then the site's ready for use for whatever purpose it will be used for. And that's probably the key thing that I'd like to stress here. The reason we go into .24 is so Ross Valley is not constricted on how that site gets developed in the future years. So remediation timeline, roughly we're looking at about 2 months, might be 3 to get the work plan done, depending on what happens at the next EPA meeting. EPA's typically looking at 8 to 12 weeks, maybe 16 weeks to approve that work plan, given the current workload. While they're approving that work plan, we can begin working on the bid packages and specifications, such that when that work plan is approved, the bid packages can go out with the approved work plan, contractors can bid on it, make their selection, and go through that whole process. Remediation, we're estimating 3 to 6 months. And there's a lot of factors. One of the things that we need to look at is how much soil needs to get hauled off site. That's going to be a concern within the city of Marin. In Larkspur, truck traffic, dust control, those types of things will have to be factored. So it may be a limited amount of soil we can haul off every day. There are going to be some mitigations that we're going to have to look at to make sure the community's best interests are protected. So it may be 3 months, it might be a 6-month process to get that material excavated and all off-site. Closure report is going to be, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 2 to 3 months. And then EPA, if we reach our goals and everything's at .24, it's 3 to 6 months, 6 months being on the outside. So 18 months to 24 months from the time, roughly from now, if we keep acting on it.
So if everything goes well, in 4 years, it's ready to go.
2 years, 18 to 24 months.
Oh, I just added up, I took the top end. It's 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. Is some of those the same months? So like if I took 2 months and then 4 months is 6, it's 4 months is
So you got 10 months, 16.
16 months,
3 months.
19 months, 25 months, and 24 months is,
Overall time frame, 24 months.
yeah. Oh,
That
it's
last
not-
The last one is the overall time frame. I've already added it up.
Oh,
for you.
okay, that is total.
Yeah.
That's not on top of.
No.
Okay.
That's the
So a
sum.
question, EPA has run into some problems with Flint, Michigan, where they kind of looked at some pollution issues and said, that's not a big problem, not a big issue. Do you think a result of Flint, Michigan, that EPA is going to be changing how they look at public agencies and contaminated sites and how they treat sites like this? I mean, heads are going to roll at EPA. There's going to be people leaving all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
From the
yeah.
EPA, as a result of Flint, Michigan.
Are they going to look at the way they approach contaminated sites? In general, probably not. In general, what they will probably do is they're going to make sure that their procedures are better checked. They'll have some internal QC procedures to make sure that if a contractor is doing work that meets with the particular regulations of that work and his remedial goals are meeting whatever is set, whether it be the US EPA remedial goal or a risk-based remedial goal or something from California. They'll have more internal checks. And Flint, Michigan was just a debacle from all scales, from the city scale, from the EPA scale. That was just a complete failure of a lot of different agencies, quite frankly.
It's not the first, and it won't be the last.
No, it was not the first, and it will not be the last, no. I mean, quite frankly, you're looking at, air regulations are a big thing now. And, air districts, what happens at California Air Resources Board versus the local air districts is a big issue, and there's a power struggle there too. So there's a lot of concerns with a lot of different agencies.
Okay.
I just have one quick
Okay.
question. When this work begins, will the community be at risk in some way, health hazard wise? Or will there be like, I know they'll probably come out and ventilators. I mean, I'm just trying to envision how it's going to go down.
Sure. The risks will be mitigated as best they can, and let me describe the risk for you. So we're talking about off-hauling soil. So you've got trucks on the road. That's a risk. I can't do anything about that, but we can minimize it by contracting with the right trucking firm and making sure they have good. But what you're probably talking about is the actual excavation activities on site.
Yeah.
So when you excavate, there are rules and regulations for minimizing dust. EPA's already told us they will require dust monitoring at the edge of the site. to
And they'll
make sure
test, they'll
that-
test the air.
Test the
All
air
right.
in real time to make sure that we are
Okay.
meeting those standards. So yeah, we can't excavate soil without creating dust, but there are engineering
Yeah.
standards that will minimize that dust creation,
Okay.
and we will be monitoring for it per EPA rates.
Okay.
And everyone knows we have a low-income housing project above and a high-end housing project to the east. And
Yep.
those folks will be completely safe. They won't have to worry about,
They will not have to worry about it. So part of any large remediation project is going to be a CEQA review. And that will be part of this. And then the lead agency will probably be the city. That's usually how it works.
Larkspur will be the lead agency for this, for
Typically.
CEQA?
And
Yeah, they
CEQA is
own
going to look at all of those factors, all of those risk factors from air, truck traffic, stormwater, all of those items. I can't guarantee it's gonna be the city, but typically it's either the city or the county. It depends on who wants to take the lead.
Isn't it the
But-
zoning? I thought the zoning would be the lead.
It could be the building department. I've done this types of work where building department's the lead because they issued a grading permit.
Okay.
So unfortunately, every county in California is different.
so we will not be the lead agency.
No. You could be, you could elect to be the lead agency.
If they want us to pay for it.
So, but there will be a CEQA review that will be required, because somewhere on some person's form, there will be a box with CEQA completed. And someone's gonna have to check yes, so, you will be looking at mitigating potential risks, and first of all, identifying the risks, and then mitigating those potential risks.
Where does that fit in your timeline?
That's gonna be done as part of the contractor bid process. So, part of the work plan will be addressing site concerns such as dust generation, stormwater runoff. Those will all be part of the document. Truck traffic is just going to be a mitigated issue with the permit for the site typically. They'll say that trucks are not allowed to operate during typical commute hours.
It must have cover or something.
The last,
Well, yeah, covered. A lot of those things are required for California anyway. They have to be covered. They can't leave the site without being covered.
so you think we get through CEQA in 2 years?
Well, because it's a remediation project, it's a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration.
Oh.
A neg deck or a mitigated neg deck, as they call it. It's not gonna be a full-blown EIR CEQA
Okay.
process, no.
Okay.
Typically, these don't even go out for public review.
Really?
Now, for this particular site, there will be probably, I imagine, a public review process. And I have no problem with that. But it's not required to go out for public review, as far as I'm aware. But there is a lead agency that has to sign off that says, all of these things were done. Because CEQA has certain exemptions in it, and environmental remediation projects have an exemption.
Now, the last CEQA case I was involved with, it took 6 years.
I'm involved in one right now that probably never will be resolved. So, yes, I know how they go. They can be very difficult.
Okay. I think if we're done with this one, I look forward to the next report. Oh,
Need to open it to the
oh,
public.
I'm sorry. Yes, please.
It's okay, all right, thank you.
And
So
your
I'm
name?
Bob Silvestri, and you were gracious enough to let me present here about 6 months ago at your presentation about our interest in the property. Our interest is to build senior assisted living housing and an aquaponic, state-of-the-art aquaponic farming operation that will give away $100,000 a year in free food to poor people and people in need in Marin every year forever. We only need about 2/3 of the property, so the southern section is pretty much what RVSD is on now. If you come into the road and what's south of it towards the bay, we don't need that much property. Listening to this and having a lot of experience with CEQA and with development, I hope we're all healthy and alive when this is all done. Still here. This is one of these plan for the worst, hope for the best kind of operation. I think everything the consultant said makes a heck of a lot of sense. He clearly knows what he's doing. If there's a CADX, category exemption on single mitigated native decks, then he's correct. That does have to be disclosed to the public, and they can view it, but it doesn't require a comment period of more than a week. So that can move along, and as you know, I've been involved in a number of SEPA things. So I just want to say that whenever this happens, and I think it sounds like everybody here is doing their best to figure out how to do it to make it happen in obviously a timely manner, which you don't have complete control over. But when you do decide that you have a work plan and therefore you start to feel assured that the property has value to be used for some purpose, whatever that may be, I just want to ask and be sure that RVSD will do, if they decide to either sell or lease or entertain any kind of, proposals for the property, that you do a proper public RFP for that. And you make sure that everyone, I'm not as a business person, as developer, I'm not afraid to compete at all. I feel my project will stand well with any other project, and we'll be able to, we can buy the property, we can lease the property, we have the wherewithal. It's just, and I realize the price is unknowable and didn't get there, and nobody knows what it is 2 years from now. Maybe we're in a recession, maybe everything's still going through the roof. But a proper RFP that gives everybody a reasonable chance to put in a proposal and for your consideration. And that's all we ask, is a level playing field. And just so you know, we are reaching out from our proposal in the event that you would say, well, you just want to sell the whole property. We are having conversations with people that own the Country Mart and others that need, because it's a team effort. If people need parts, he doesn't need the whole property for parking. It's way too much, and he couldn't possibly afford it. Being it's developable land, you can't buy that land for parking, but a portion of it you might. So I'm in non-profit. My organization is a non-profit. We're a 501c3. We're not in this to make a lot of money. We're in for public benefit, to provide things to the public. Our main goal here is that senior assisted living, if I could just say, is quite arguably the least impactful possible development that can happen on the property, because it doesn't impact traffic. It's like the Redwoods in Mill Valley. The average age is 84 years old. Nobody drives. And I talked with Dan Morrison and people on the work for council about this. Traffic is the big, you don't have to, it's no secret, the traffic and parking is the big craziness in Marin. And the other one is schools. You start to bring in lots and lots of families. Our high schools and junior highs, which are incredibly expensive to remodel and expand, are maxed out, and other things. So that is, and our goal is to give away free food, and we believe we can do it. We can do it in an incredibly efficient way. Aquaponics uses 10% of the water of the best practice in the ground farming, produces 2 to 3 tons per acre, the food all year round every day. So, we have honorable goals. That doesn't mean you choose us on those, but I'm just saying, we just want a chance with the RFP, so that's all I came for.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb.
Thank you. Steve Lamb, San Anselmo. A couple of questions. One is, does the California EPA have any role or concern or part to play in this effort? The second question is, there's a couple of neighboring properties which are outside of the work area along Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, and do either of those, do they play a role, or do they have a concern, or are they involved in any way in this work?
So I can answer the first one, which is Cal EPA is made up of 2 sister agencies, well, a whole bunch of agencies, but 2 primary ones responsible for environmental remediation or investigation type services are DTSC, Department of Toxic Substances Control, and the regional State Water Resources Control Board. DTSC has already reviewed all the data on the site and issued a no further action letter in 2006, I think it was. The regional board would not be involved in this action because there's no threat to groundwater.
Because it's what?
There's no threat to groundwater.
Oh.
These PCBs, they're immobile, so there's no threat. So DTSC would actually have authority on this site over the regional board. Your other agencies, county health department, because it's a TSCA issue, they would rescind their authority to US EPA. They're not going to have either the money or the wherewithal or the experience to deal with PCBs. So from a agency perspective, DTSC will be copied on everything. The regional board will be copied on everything. They will have the opportunity to work with EPA to make sure their interests are aligned. But DTSC's already issued no further action. They've already seen all the data for the site, and with the exception of the high-level PCBs, just to kind of back up historically, the high concentration of PCB, the 2 or 3 samples that are extremely elevated or were elevated when they were found after DTSC issued the no further action. So what that means is PCBs are not part of that no further action letter. That's why EPA is involved in EPA's leading the PCB issue. The no further action letter comes from the metals and the TPH and the PAHs and the other contaminant concept. So EPA actually has regulatory authority over the PCBs. If that answers the question. And then for the other one, I don't know about what other properties you're referring to, so.
I think, are you asking, Steve, just if are there any, in a sense, impacts or considerations we need to take into account for the adjoining properties? Is that,
Right.
Okay, Todd, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so those will be taken into account. Those will be part of the work plan. So as we discussed earlier, dust suppression is the biggest issue with this type of work. There will be a requirement for dust suppression. That's a requirement for every excavation in most of the United States. There will be a requirement by EPA. They've already told us that they will require real-time monitoring at the edge of the site for airborne dust contaminants, or airborne dust. The site will be controlled for potential stormwater runoff. So the neighboring properties will be as protected as they possibly can be throughout the process.
Any further comments? Good, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
I'd like to take a break, please.
Oh, absolutely. Let's take a break.
April 2018, huh?
Avenue Sewer Rehabilitation and Town of San Anselmo, FY 2015/16 Magnolia Avenue paving project.
Okay, I'll do a quick overview, and we also have Acting District Engineer Catherine Hayden here to answer any questions. This is an item that, it's work that we had, the district has long identified and was included in the design work that we did for what we refer to as the 2014-15 gravity sewer pipeline rehabilitation project. And so for just quick background, that is the major project that's already under construction right now with M&G. But before that contract was let, even though we had design done, we were already in coordination and communication with the city of San Anselmo and knew that they had this major street paving rehabilitation project planned for the same reach of San Anselmo of Magnolia. And just as a point of clarification, we spent the last year and a half talking about Magnolia project. That's a different Magnolia project. Okay, everybody's clear. This is the very small residential street just to the, I think to the west and just to the west of downtown, or to the City Hall, I think, area. And so we purposely removed it from the contract that was put out for bid, with the anticipation that we would do it as a joint project with the city of San Anselmo. We have gotten to the point finally at this where we are ready to go on this project, and the arrangement that we're proposing here is a very standard one that we've done a number of times in the last several years, where the district has a need for a capital project in the street. And the city agency who has responsibility for the street also has typically a major pavement rehabilitation project. And so to avoid duplicating all of the management and overhead costs of doing those two projects, and to avoid the repetitive disruption to the public of having two agencies come in, we package these activities as one biddable construction package, and then one agency takes the lead in carrying that out, and the other agency shares in the specific costs related to their work. So, for example, in the recent other Magnolia project, we had an arrangement with the city of Larkspur to help cover the cost of the repaving after that trunk line work. So in some cases, the district has acted as the lead, and in other cases, the other agency has acted as the lead. We typically just make that decision on kind of a practical basis as to where is really the largest scope of work and so forth. So for example, if one agency has, and I'm just making up numbers here to illustrate, if one agency has $50,000 worth of work and the other agency has $500,000 worth of work, all things being equal, we kind of say, okay, you know, you got the lion's shares of activity here, why don't you go ahead and lead the project, and we will have an agreement to reimburse you for that, you know, $50,000. And in this case, it made sense in discussions with San Anselmo staff for the district to just go ahead and be the lead on this. So under this approach, the district would put out one standard public works contract. It would include the wastewater line rehabilitation and the replacement of the lower laterals in that section. Approximately just a little under 900 feet is the length we're talking about. And the same contractor under the same contract would go in and do all of the paving rehabilitation that the city of San Anselmo is looking for. And then as the project is completed and we receive invoices and so forth from the contractor under this proposed agreement, we would pay those and then get reimbursement from the city of San Anselmo. So that's what this item is about. You have a basic, the design, it's just obviously a lot of detail just to show you the overall layout. It's a very standard project from that perspective. On a kind of background note, I think to everyone's credit, at this, in this case, and a number of the other local agencies, we're seeing more and more of these types of cooperative projects, which we think really benefits the public in general for the reasons we've already noted. So staff's recommendation is to approve the authorizing the call for bids on this project. And the district, I passed over one very important point. I think it's mentioned in the staff report. We did already discuss and authorize the actual cost share agreement itself. So this is just a supporting step to allow staff to go out and call for bids and begin the process of executing the work. So that's what we have in front of you this evening, and I'll hand it back to the board and we can answer any questions.
Board?
A question is, so is that section of Magnolia going to be repaved curb to curb? Is that what's happening?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and plus we're putting in a little under 900 feet of an 8-inch sewer line?
Yes.
And all of that for 450 to 500,000?
Yes.
The paving's relatively inexpensive in terms of the work that we do. So the sewer portion of that is 300 to 400,000 would be the sewer part of that. The paving's about 140,000.
Well,
We can't say where the bids will come in.
Right.
are we doing a campaign to get the, are you finished, Frank?
Well, just one more question.
Sure,
And though
sorry.
It's down the street from here. The Saunders and Center Boulevard project we did the big, large
Diameter, the urgent repairs on the large diameter, is that?
They're digging it up again. What did something get fouled up?
It's the small diameter line they're doing. So it's the line that goes into the trunk in that vicinity.
Oh, they're digging up the same hole where they went down?
Not as deep.
For the first one?
Yeah, there's a manhole that was just slightly away from the manhole which the large diameter line came into, so that's where the small diameter line terminates. So it's really close to where, it's at the same manhole that it comes into.
It's a different.
It's much shallower, small diameter.
It's a different project?
Yes.
When they were out there with the excavator digging a big hole the other day. How come they didn't do that when we did the big diameter?
Well, I can try to address that. When they were in there doing the large diameter work, that was a very specialized and high priority set of activities. So they
Yeah.
had that major excavation going, and we were doing a specific type of rehabilitation method. And remind me, sorry, Catherine, what the we were doing a slip lining approach there, Frank, for that.
For that, yeah,
for that
large
deep
diameter.
section of large diameter, right.
Yeah.
So the idea there, for a lot of reasons we discussed, was to have that contractor get in and get out as quick as they could to complete that work, because it was deemed very urgent based on the condition of the pipe and the upcoming winter flow situations. So that was the reasoning, to just get in and get that done and not worry about the remaining, at that time, the small diameter work in the same vicinity. So it was just a matter of urgency of getting that work out of the way. And also, again, different.
That's our project they're doing there.
Oh, yeah.
At Saunders
right.
and Center.
Right,
Okay.
but different construction methods and sort of different magnitude. Now we're back to basic, what I'll call more standard, open cut excavation, small diameter gravity sewer line.
Over the weekend, there were 2 vacuum trucks further up Center Boulevard. Looked like they were on private property, some private, they had part of Center Boulevard blocked.
That was lining, so we're doing the CFDP lining, and some of the areas we're doing over the weekend because of traffic impacts.
Okay.
So some of it's town of San Anselmo requested Sunday work or something.
Okay. Those weren't our crew, our vacuum trucks, they were somebody else's.
The contractors
Oh, okay.
for us.
Okay.
Yeah, on our
Okay.
project this weekend.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Are you, we're doing the lower laterals, are you notifying the property owners that that this is
Yes.
a good time to do the upper lateral?
Yes, we target these areas like this when we know about them ahead of time. And I don't have all the details, but I know that we have targeted that whole area in terms of very specific outreach. We do door hangers. And also, on a quick side note, the City of San Anselmo staff are they are extremely supportive of the lateral program. So they essentially add to our efforts through their own outreach. So typically, we've had very high success rates when we've done that. So I don't think at the moment we don't really have a better, I would say a better capital project partner right now that helps us and really works well in pushing those kinds of things at the moment than San Anselmo. So I mean, I just want to acknowledge that because they've just been, their staff there have been excellent partners on doing these things. So when we were out to do outreach on lateral replacements, Rachel Calvert and remind me, Sean Condry, the city manager often makes references to our lateral assistance program in the weekly newsletters that Debbie Stutzman sends out. So yeah, just a very, to their credit, I think a really good working relationship. So.
Okay,
I got a couple of questions.
absolutely.
So liability-wise for the work that San Anselmo does, how does that play out? Or because they're paying part and we're paying part, if something goes wrong with their
Right.
paving and, you know what I'm saying?
Right,
Do we
right.
have to do some kind of agreement that's?
So the cost share agreement, I'm going
Was it last month?
to defer to Andrea, yeah, that we approved, I believe addresses that to some degree. The actual work itself, though, is done, I'm going to describe this quite broadly, but it's done in accordance with the standard, public contract requirements. And so things like performance bonds, the inspection standards, the quality control standards are all built into this just like they would any standard paving project.
Okay.
So the specific answer of what happens if
They do a bad
say
job.
6 months after they're done, there's a problem with the street or
Yeah,
something, Pam,
yeah.
I'm actually not sure of the process for that. But I think there are, in the basic contracting and execution of the work, there are all the normal checks and balances and performance bond aspects, so.
And then this part that's being replaced, what's the acuity on it, the level of acuity? In other words, what level is the, we have different classifications for different rehabs that need to be done. Is this at the highest?
Yeah, that's why it was in the FY 14-15 scope overall when we did the design.
Mhm.
That batch was the highest priority work out of the risk model at that time. So this fits that criteria.
Thank you.
Anybody else, board?
Well, if it's an order, I'd so move to authorize the general
Oh,
manager.
we gotta
Oh,
go.
wait, just,
I'm sorry.
no, I'm sure it's gonna
Oh,
be
I'm
okay.
sorry, I just thought-
Mr. Lamb.
Thank you. Steve Lamb, San Anselmo. Incidentally, the part of the road that you were talking about on Saunders and Center, they're actually on the other side of the road than they were working on. You know, it's not a big road, but I was curious about that work too. And I want to repeat how much I appreciate the cooperative efforts between the agency and the town. And I think that's a wonderful model, and I continue to encourage you to pursue that to whatever degree you can, both as a resident of San Anselmo and a resident of the district. It makes so much sense to me, so thank you very much. The last thing, there was some work done recently right outside my apartment on San Anselmo Avenue, the 1000 block of San Anselmo Avenue. And that's been completed, and they put up signs at both ends of the big signs, you know, twice as big as this table. And they said from like January 21st to February 5th. And then February 12th, and then February 18th.
It rained.
And then they finished, you know, at the beginning of March. So if there's some way that you can like do that better with the noticing and the dates, I think that would help everyone, you know, because if once you get into that kind of a pattern, the next time, you know, I look at a sign and I see 3 weeks, I'm going to imagine 6 or 8 or 10, right? So that's just a suggestion.
We need worst-case scenario signs.
That project has gone longer on many streets.
Yeah.
You know, we also met with the county staff.
Yeah.
So we've done San Anselmo and the county,
Yes.
you know, for their paving projects. We coordinate our projects with county paving as well. And
And
we'd like to do with all the towns.
Yeah, that's been a sort of an informal initiative in a sense of the district over the last 1 or 2 years. And we've had, some very helpful constructive meetings with county public works staff. We actually have another one in about a week and a half or 2 weeks with senior staff of public works and roads department for just that whole topic. So I think everyone recognizes that that there's a lot of potential there to improve the efficiency of how those various projects get delivered, because virtually all of the local municipalities now have major road rehabilitation programs going. And at the same time, the sanitary districts, the water district, et cetera, have significant capital programs on underground facilities. And it's a pretty clear picture to most people that, boy, your 2 public agencies doing the same thing in the street, if there's any way to avoid doing it twice, it would, it'd sure be great. So there's a lot of potential there, and I think right now we're getting very positive feedback and engagement with the other agency staff. So I'm hoping to bring back, some updated information in the next few months of ways that we can take actual specific actions on that, either with county public works and so forth. And some of the ideas, just to touch on this, I know it's a little bit off topic, is when we have say, I'm just making up a number here, we may have 20 sites that need significant repaving after a bunch of, individual areas that our contractor has worked in. If we do that paving under the Ross Valley construction contract, it will be, the contractors will cost it at a certain unit price based on the scale of work. If that same work were reasonably rolled into a consolidated county paving contract that were 10 times that size because they're doing work in a whole bunch of areas, then at least the potential is there that that work gets done at substantially lower cost. And so that was the driver when we had the city of Larkspur do the paving recently on Magnolia. It was part of a much larger paving project that the city was taking care of. So we left it and didn't have our contractor do it, and the city takes care of it at a much more competitive price, and then we reimburse them based, on our cost share of that more competitive price. So there's a lot of potential there that we're trying to look into with the other agencies. Again, right now, we're getting really strong support and interest in that. We just don't have any details yet. So.
Great. Okay, back to Frank.
Okay, if it's in order, I'd so move to authorize the general manager to call for bids for construction of the 2016 Magnolia Avenue sewer rehabilitation and Town of San Anselmo fiscal year 2015-16 Magnolia Avenue paving project. Should we have the estimated cost in the motion or not?
You can if you'd like. This is you did approve an agreement last month that did have costs in it. So this is just to put the bids out, but all of this would fall under that prior agreement that did have a cost associated with it.
So the costs are covered, we don't have to.
Yeah, so that's essentially already addressed.
I second.
Roll call or?
You can, it's not necessary, but you can.
Gaffney?
Yes.
Scylla?
Yes.
Nate?
Aye.
Baker?
Aye.
Forsy?
Yes. Almost fit here. Okay, item number 11, direction and discussion of draft board policy, board interaction with staff.
Okay, very brief introduction on this one. This is just the next in the series of updated policies that we've been bringing to the board for your consideration. Based on your direction and feedback to the staff, we then have been revising the draft policies and bringing those back to you at a subsequent meeting for consideration of adoption. In this case, this is the first time you are seeing this new proposed draft policy, so it is just a discussion and direction this evening. So the specific topic is, as you can see, board interaction with staff. It's a very brief policy that sets, we think, some constructive guidelines. It's pulled from, I think, best practices and feedback we've received, such as from when we worked with Brent Ives about a year and a half ago on best practices for boards. And this is, again, just the continuation of that policy update process. So I'll turn it back to the board. We're, I think, just to be clear, Mary Brown, Andrea Clark, and myself, to varying degrees, basically coordinate and participate in developing the draft policies. So hopefully between the three of us, we can address any questions you have.
The board?
We have earlier had a pattern of talking directly with the attorney. So this is intended to change that for us. I mean, I would say I have not with you, but when I've served as the president of the board, I spoke with Jolie directly very frequently. So I just wanted to note that. I think it's a great idea. And I know, I mean, it occurred to me at times when I was being contacted directly by staff, and again, this was in another era, and I think when I was serving as president of the board, if a staff member contacted me, I did call Greg and say, I just want you to know. And I think this is the ideal. I just wanted to note that there was a pattern of not that. And I wanted to just be clear, too, that that is what you intend. You intend, if we had something we wanted to discuss with you, that we should go to Greg, and then Greg could channel it to you if he thought appropriate, give us permission to speak to you directly.
Yes and no. I mean, I agree with what you're saying about the board's relationship with council, although, but I do think this is more directed generally to district staff. That's not to say I don't think it's a good policy to essentially apply it to me, but I did communicate separately with the board when I first came on about what I think my role is and how I intend to communicate with the board. So while this wasn't directly intended to say this is how thou shalt communicate with general counsel. I don't think this is inconsistent with the general notion that I work primarily through, just like staff, I work primarily through Greg, but I also have a different role because I communicate with you more formally as a client group.
Okay, so that first
yeah.
sentence is not intended, I've like drawn a little circle around Greg, to staff, to district attorneys, and to consultants. You know, and again, I said it as a general rule, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think that's
just
true.
wanted to note that that wasn't the practice. I certainly
Agreed.
believe that it should be true in terms of staff, but it's a little bit different with you.
A little, but it's still primarily true. I mean, one complication of individual board members contacting me is that my client is not an individual person on the board, and so it puts me in the position of, and this what I usually typically do, is then communicate with you as a group if I get one question. So I agree, I think that's generally a good policy to have with staff and with general counsel.
Anybody else?
So I'm just trying to sort this through. The council is, the board is the client of the council. And the manager manages the district agency. I don't know, do I ever call you or email you? I don't think I do, but I'm thinking to myself, if there was something really important that I thought I needed an answer to, that I might. Tell me if you think I've emailed you or anything. I don't think I contact our council outside of a discussion at a meeting. But as a board member, I'm elected to represent the community, and so there may be times when I may have a question that may rise over and above whatever hierarchy
Right.
of legal.
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. And what it means is that I need to find a way to then communicate with all of you because one has raised a question. I think it's really mostly an efficiency and practicality rule with respect to running things through Greg so that Greg can let me know if something ought to be looked into because there's a board member or a couple board members who are asking about it as opposed to communicating directly with me. And I do think that a constant level of communication between individual board members and general counsel can lead to not so great results. So that's all I meant by it. I agree there are situations when you may want to bring something to my attention and I think there are times when that's appropriate.
And looking at the second paragraph where it talks about if board members are contacted by staff who are not formally designated for board communications, does staff mean employees?
Yes.
Okay, so let me tell you my role as a mayor or as a board member on agencies that I've sat on. Sometimes people give me information that's confidential that they wouldn't necessarily come to a meeting and disclose. And they do that because they know that they're not going to hear their name in public that Mary or Joe told me this about whatever. But as an elected official, I gather information from all over. And so sometimes, I don't know, maybe an employee I'll run into an employee on the street someplace. I used to try to show up at the spills when I found out there was a significant spill. I'd show up there and say, hey, what's going on here? How are we doing? Do we have it covered? And then from time to time I would hear something that I would say, oh, okay. Okay. And then when I came back to this role, I had maybe a little different insight about something that I didn't divulge who I heard it from. That's if I think if it's righteous statement or whatever, or complaint. So, is this meant to prohibit us from talking to an employee?
I don't think it's meant to, well, I'll start, and then you should weigh in. I don't think it's meant to prohibit you from talking to employees. I think the goal here is that not so much that you run into a staff person on the street and they talk to you about something unrelated to the district, but for district matters, as a general matter, it makes sense for the communication to go through Greg, or for you to let Greg or the general manager know that there's been a request made, or a staff member has approached you and asked you a particular question or to do something.
Have you ever represented a city or a county board of supervisors?
No, I don't do city attorney or county council work.
Okay.
But do you want to weigh in also on the
I
goal of
think,
that?
one of the key words here is the word primary. You know, this is a policy as it's proposed, and it's, I think this is, as I understand it, and I'm drawing heavily from the workshop that we went through a year or so back with Brent Ives, is, it's meant to establish these hopefully clear guidelines. And let me, it should not be about today's individuals. It shouldn't be about, Greg as general manager, or Frank Yeager as a board member, or et cetera. Because it's a policy for the long run for this district to set best practices based on what we think will maintain, a healthy, constructive communication dynamic at the district. Now, this particular district has, I think, by most measures, a history of some fairly acute problems in this area, in both directions of staff, and this is all, at the moment, I think, we're largely in our rearview mirror, to everyone's credit, in a whole bunch of ways. But in the past, I think anecdotally speaking, we know that this district has had all kinds of acute problems with that, and it's been very disruptive. You've had improper, very inappropriate, communications from staff reaching out to board members, and vice versa, board members reaching out to staff. That has involved, in some cases, ongoing significant staff disciplinary issues that are in the middle of, being handled. So it has been a very unhealthy dynamic at this district, just as a point of reference as to why such policies are recommended and are important in the long run. So I think that, at least in my professional understanding, nothing here is meant to, preclude, highly unusual circumstances where people use their best professional judgment. These are policy guidelines. If somebody thinks that there's something incredibly egregious going on, that, whatever that might be, obviously they may choose to say, gosh, I'm only comfortable going to this path. Those are the exceptions. Those should be extremely rare exceptions, because most business of the district is carried out more effectively and more productively if there's a clear line of communication. I can't act as general manager on information I'm not aware of. I can't act on rumors. I can't act on hearsay. And vice versa, if for example, a board member is talking to a staff person, that staff person may be expressing a view or assessing a situation where they have just a sliver of the total picture, because that is what they're exposed to at their particular view. And so there's all kinds of pitfalls here and how that can go terribly wrong. So that's what this, to me, from a professional perspective, is about. It is, I think, underpinned by a working assumption that we're an organization where we value professionalism and courtesy and consistency, and so we generally strive for these things anyway. But in the past, this district has not had these types of policies. They're widely recognized by CSDA and all the other, I think, governmental related agencies and entities in the state as best practices. So that's sort of how I look at it. It's not meant to be an ironclad rule. It's meant to set a series of good standards for us to strive to follow.
Any other board members?
Anybody else?
I'm not hearing any from down here.
Anybody else going to talk?
No, I'm not hearing anything. from
Okay,
here.
so I have to say I feel a bit offended by this, and I always am the one that carries more of the torch maybe up here than some, but I know there's internal issues, Greg. I really know that. I've been here 6.5 years, or 6, yeah. So I know the internal issues. I've been through a trial, I've been through a lot, different changes in staff, a lot of staff, different board members. But I feel my First Amendment right is a bit trampled here. I do. First of all, I want to say that this board is elected by the people. We hire you. We look at your qualifications. We do this with the attorney. We do this, you know, for the whole district. And so I feel like you're trying to govern and sort of want us to come to this certain place of you want us to be a certain way. And so I feel like you're trying to micromanage the board. And this is the opposite role. We govern you. And so I'm sorry, but I feel offended by this. I really do. And I think there are better ways to, you know, for these internal problems than to create a policy that says we can't talk to anybody but to you.
I don't quite think that's what it says, but
It says it's got to go all through the general manager. All through the general manager here.
Well, for what it's worth, I mean, I guess I would defer. This is not something that I proposed. This was part of the range of topics that we have identified based on outreach to other agencies and to resources like, you know, like Brent Ives, who did the workshop with you, like looking at the California Special Districts Association best practices. So if it is perceived that way, that certainly was not the intent, and I hear you loud and clear, but I don't really know what I do about that.
A couple people from the public talked to me about this, and they felt the same way. They're like, who's taking care of who here? We are elected by the people, but in being through what I've been through on the board, it's a little bit of some deja vu. It's put in a policy, so it's you know, out there, but I would hope it'd be a little softer and more refined. So that's my thoughts and feelings about it. Maybe you want to revisit it or have us send in some verbiage, or you guys wrote this, right? The three of you?
I'm the person that is leading this project to update all of the policies for the board. And this was one of the things that was on the table of contents that was brought to the board, I believe, several months ago. This board interaction with staff, I don't think that there's one sentence in here that's original to our district. Every single piece of this was pulled from the CSDA and considered best practices by dozens of their sanitary and sanitation and special district agencies. So that's where all of this language came from. I think the only words that I may have changed were district manager to general manager.
Well, I'm not changing how I feel. It's like our goal is to move towards transparency and trust in the community, and it sort of looks like that the board's not trusted by this kind of a policy. I'm just telling you, it feels like it's a little bit too much.
Is there, are there some specific
well, I mean, it's like if a person in the community approaches me and they've got an issue with the board or the whatever, whatever, and I'm going to say, no, I can't talk to you. You have to go talk to the manager.
I don't think that's
This
what
isn't
it's-
about members of the public.
I think that's where a lot of this has come from.
Well, let me try to clarify if I can. This is strictly intended to address communications related to board business between the board and staff. Members of the public who have communications with the board, this policy is not intended, nor does it address that in any way, shape, or form. Board members are free to obviously have all of the communications of any nature that you decide to, and that people maybe bring to your attention. This is strictly intended to address the business of communications within the entity of outside sanitary district from its elected leadership through all of the employees of the district. That's it. This is an internally focused policy. It's not intended to address, I think, what I'm hearing you refer to, which is any member of the public, et cetera, anyone not an employee of this district who wants to communicate with.
Okay, but what if I don't trust you? Then what do I do? Who do I go to?
And what
If there's a issue that you're having with your role?
I would say.
I mean, I've seen a lot.
Yeah, generally speaking, I think if a board member had a significant concern with a general manager that the agency has hired, and they didn't, for whatever reason, feel that addressing it directly with the general manager was appropriate or feasible for whatever reason, my professional opinion would be that you would start with district council and go from there.
And as our employee, if we say something to you, it is confidential. You're not required by law to share it.
No, if there are employment issues related to Greg, that's a little bit different, and you could talk to me about that. Also, you amongst yourselves as Greg's employer talk about that in the context of his reviews, or if there's another if there's a point that you want to talk about Greg's performance, you can do that in closed session without him being there at any point. So that's really a matter for the board members to discuss amongst each other. This is really about what you're talking to staff, your interactions with staff, as Greg was saying, and it doesn't relate at all to folks you talk to on the street that you interact with as electeds.
So is there a gag order on the staff about talking to board members?
That's what I was going to ask.
Absolutely.
No.
I can tell you.
It feels like
No,
a gag
and
order
this
here.
didn't come from, as just so we're all clear, this didn't come out of any incident that we're trying to prevent. This is simply just one of a number of best practice policies that Mary's been looking at, that the board directed her to bring policies for best practices back to the board.
Generally, it's a way to control the board, so that the board doesn't get out of hand. I mean, special districts.
I'm not sure that.
Special districts.
Are you implying Greg has
This
control
is-
over it?
This is pretty much, I see that in special districts. I sit on 4 of them, and the managers want to control what goes on in the special districts. I understand that. But we're elected officials. 2 of the boards I sit on are appointed, and 3 are appointed, and 1 is elected. And of course, the managers want to control pretty much the whole agenda, what's going on, and who's talking and who's not talking, and how the agency's perceived. I don't want to use the old term, the mushroom theory, but I mean, that happens with special districts much more than cities or boards of supervisors. It's much different when you're elected mayor or you're elected supervisor. You depend on getting information from staff about how the management's running. I mean, just the way it is.
Yeah.
And
If I might just interject here, how my experience over the past 2 years is that I have not been given any gag order or anything else to speak with anybody at any time. And what I don't do ever is discuss board policy with any of the staff. I hear information, I learn things about things that we're going to vote on that we don't ever get to see here because you can't. I've watched installation of our new smart covers from start to finish and seen exactly how they work. I don't discuss it as a board policy. I don't discuss how much they cost or what I think, other than that's pretty cool technology. And the few times that I have heard, because I try to listen, I always report back to Greg that these are some things that I think perhaps should be brought up that have been brought up before us on future agendas, and we should address them because they're concerns. But what I don't do is down here undermine the general manager. And I have heard that previous general managers, who shall remain nameless, did have policies about you don't talk to anybody and nobody talks to a board member. And I've not felt that here. And I think that within like the realm of what I do, where I'm trying to learn and find out how the system works, to better be a well-informed board member and help make decisions, stopping and talking about what is going on and happening. And if I were to hear, as it says here, of a problem that is occurring, it specifically says, you know, look, don't try and solve it outside of the general manager. Inform the general manager of the communication. And if it were something really, you know, of a sensitive nature, I suspect I would call Andrea first and ask her, how should I proceed with this bit of information which I have gleaned? But anyway, my opinion.
So I wasn't quite finished. So I just want to know, as an example, when a board member asks to go out on the street with informational pamphlets to hand out about the settlement issue, if I'm mistaken, tell me, would that be an example of breaking this policy? When you and a board member went out on the street?
I don't think myself, I'm not aware.
Because that was a board-related issue that was coming up.
I think I know what you're referring to, Pam.
Yeah.
There was nobody handing out information or pamphlets. That is not, I would not consider this, that was I think, reasonably characterized as a board to public communication. And as we mentioned earlier, I think that is sort of within your own individual purviews. If you want to hold a forum on your own and go talk about a topic, I don't know that that's good or bad in itself, but it has nothing to do with this policy. You wouldn't be violating, in a sense, any of the standards or process established in this policy. So again, this policy does not address, you know, board members having external communications. It's strictly intended to apply to internal communications.
I would like to just comment on that.
I'm not done, please. I wanted to ask the attorney then, every question I've asked you, you have put it out to the whole board. Does that mean if I had an issue with a grievance or something, is that going to happen?
What do you mean by a grievance?
Well, anything that seems a little bit, that I don't want it to go out to the total board. Would this policy say that's, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm not sure that this policy would prevent you from doing that. I think when I get a question, I think about that. And I think, is this the kind of thing that is appropriate for me to let the board know I received a question and then I'm going to answer it or not? And in some cases, in at least one case, it wasn't. I don't actually think that this particular policy would prevent that or necessarily slow that down. I don't want you to think that you
Yeah,
can't,
I don't know.
you
I walk on eggshells with that when I send you questions, because sometimes they go out to all the board members without me knowing, and I'm not crazy about that. 'Cause I
Right.
wish you and I would have had some discussion.
Okay, well, that's
And
helpful.
then other
yeah.
times, they don't. So I don't
Right.
know what the rule is on that.
Right, well, I mean, I try to take it on a case-by-case basis, to be honest. But it's good to hear that you'd rather communicate, you'd rather know in advance if I'm going to send something out to
Yeah,
the board. What I try to do is if it's a question that I presume others would have or that others would be enlightened by the answer, that's when I communicate with the
Okay.
board about it.
Okay.
And I would just like to make it clear that that whole settlement thing, we did not have to, as a board, give out any information about the settlement before the board meeting were in open session. We agreed to it. Some of us agreed to it. We released it on our website the Friday before. It was up as a public document on our website. And we did not give an opinion about it or anything else. I had hard copies, and there wasn't a Brown Act violation because it was just me and Greg to answer questions, and it was made aware, so it wasn't a meeting, it wasn't an official meeting, And Marin Against Density published a thing saying that it would be where it was, and all I did was have exact duplicates of what was public on the website already to make it convenient for any of the public that wanted to show up in full transparency to be able to ask questions at that time. That's all it was. There was no pamphleting, and it was all public information that was there already. I just want to make that clear. Yes?
I think we need to make a distinction about discussing things with the public and discussing things that are in closed session. We are not on, this recommendation policy doesn't cover that. That's covered by the Brown Act. And so anybody that goes public with closed session items is violating the Brown Act. Aside from that, I think we can talk to the public about anything that's going on in the district.
Many of us have spoken with the IJ and been quoted at different times with opinions. Anyway.
So
I
this
thought
is,
we had a policy on that. Didn't we have a policy, something, because there were letters that used to go out in the past from here that went to the IJ, and somebody would sign them, but the board didn't agree to them, so.
This doesn't, we
I
don't
know.
have a media communications.
We don't, that's what I was talking
And-
about.
and I would-
We tried to work one out, and it never happened.
And I would agree that I cannot talk to the Independent Journal speaking for the board. I can't do that unless we would all happen to come up with an agreement and agree on it. None of us can speak for the board unless we all agree on it. But any of us, because of the First Amendment, unless it's in closed session, can speak and say an opinion about whatever we want, and we do it all the time. Tom, yes, please.
Oh, did we have a policy like this now? Did we have something similar to this that was enacted years ago?
We have a civil,
I don't
I think it's
believe we have a current policy on staff board communication.
Civility.
civility statement, we do.
Okay.
We have a policy.
That's
on
for
meetings.
board members, so
That's
they
for
don't
board
swear at
meetings.
each other, call each other names.
so, so it says this item is for discussion and direction only, and what,
So,
I
let's
mean,
move on.
what I'm sensing is there's a pretty strong division board on this point. And I would say, I mean, somewhat ironically, that, in my mind, this is just good, this is what we should be doing, frankly. But if other people don't agree that this is what we should be doing, then we're not gonna be able to come to consensus as a board that this should be a policy. And so, you know, I believe that it's best practice. And I believe that it works when you have a general manager who you have faith in. And I think people on this board have experienced a general manager who did not deserve their faith. So I can understand some healthy suspicion. But I just think there's too strong a division, even if we were to take a vote. And then ironically, it wouldn't be followed. You know, it's a policy that's meant to govern our behavior, I think, in sort of gray circumstances. But
Well, it's just, sorry, may I
Let's go ahead.
add to it? And if there's what I'm hearing from, you know, some of the board members is that, you know, this can be perceived in some very, you know, potentially negative ways, either as, you know, attempt to manipulate and control the business of the district, and or to, you know, step on, you know, people's First Amendment rights. You know, those are pretty significant concerns. I would, you know, certainly suggest that if it's helpful, and you have an independent, you know, objective resource who deals with these types of policy questions, by all means, I mean, again, this isn't something that we came up with on our own. It was something we have garnered from our common resources that we go to look for best practices by elected boards, and that's it. You know, short and sweet. It has zero to do with individual, you know, the people who are at this district today, or the history of this district. It may address a past problematic history of this district in reality, but that's has, even if you did not have a past history of issues as this district has had, you, by my understanding and the standards that I've been able to learn about from, the various entities like CSDA, is that this is a good way to set long-term standards. So hopefully we can all look beyond the last couple of years' dynamics and think about what you'd want to be occurring at this district if none of the people still in this room were here. Okay, if it's a completely new set of individuals and you didn't have any say in how this agency was working except the policy legacy you left behind, what would you like that to look like? Would you like there to be guidelines on staff, board interactions or not? So those are just some questions to ponder, and I would encourage you to go, contact someone like Bent Ives or other good resources that don't have the perceived cloud of whatever it might be that you might see with individuals here today. And if you are given some good suggestions or alternative ways to address the issue, because I believe it is a very real issue that has to be addressed, I'm certainly open to suggestions as to what that might look like. This was not meant to be original work. As Mary alluded to, this has come straight out of some widely utilized public standards. So that might be useful.
If I could just say, in direct communications with staff, if I read the last line, it says, if board members are contacted by staff who are not formally designated for board communications, the board member should inform the general manager of the communications and defer the staff person to the general manager to respond. If this were to become the official policy of this agency, this would be handed to every employee that works here. And they'd be told if they were not designated as the communicator to the board from the staff, they better not talk to a board member because this policy, they'd be violating this policy. So I'd like to see this actually go to the union. I'd like to see the union take a look at this policy and see what they think of it. I think it's a workplace issue.
Maybe we could talk about maybe the term formally designated is stronger than it needs to be. I think the concept here is that a staff person who's wondering how something works at the district, who goes to a board member and says, hey, I'm wondering about how this works at the district.
That's too simple. That's too simple.
But as a default, that would appear to make sense. So let's talk about whether there are ways we could modify this so that it feels a little less problematic, but that it could be agreed to by the board. Otherwise, I agree with Mary, if it's not something we can agree to, then maybe it isn't a policy that the district adopts.
Here's what I'd like to suggest.
Might be a meet and confer item. It's dealing directly with employees.
Possibly,
So
but
I like to see it run by
I see this as saying
union.
chain of command. You need to work your chain of command in order to get employee issues at the district resolved. We have a history of not having that happen and employees coming to board members and putting little pieces of information in their ear. And maybe that made sense when the general manager wasn't trustworthy. But this is just simple chain of command stuff, and I think we could run it by the union, but I don't imagine there would be a problem. But again, I really feel like this is meant to govern behavior that I don't think we're in a position to try to govern on this board right now, just based on this discussion. I mean, to take it as an offense that you've presented us with a policy that, to me, is standard, means there's just, I think we're ungovernable on this point.
I do want to be clear on one item, though. My request to staff currently, as general manager, is that if you have concerns with district business, my professional request and courtesy that I ask of you as a staff member is to bring them up the chain of command, bring them to your supervisor, bring them to the general manager so that we can address them. What I've told people here since the day I started is, I can't solve problems I don't know about. So if you're going outside and I suddenly hear about something out of the blue, I have no context, I have no validity for that conversation. And I experienced some of that in my first, say, 6 to 7 months here, and then it quieted down, thankfully. But I just want to be clear, my guidance to staff as general manager right now, it's not a gag order, it's simply a professional request that says, I'd like you to follow the established communication channels. If you have district business concerns, please bring them to me. If you don't feel like they've been adequately addressed, you can go from there. So that is the standard that we are generally trying to follow. It's not meant to stamp on Second Amendment rights. It's not meant to be conspiratorial. It's simply meant to help set good professional courtesy and constructive communication channels at the district. And it was trying to solve a very acute problem that was, causing very disruptive and expensive problems for this agency. So if we don't see that as a problem at this point in time, I guess I would certainly suggest that we, if we can find an alternative that works better, we can bring it back in the future, or if the board prefers, we simply set it aside for now and pick it up another day. But I would ask, and I think in the interest of trying to move forward constructively, that if you are at least willing to acknowledge that it would be useful to have a policy that addresses the topic of communications, what would you like that to look like? And maybe there aren't good alternatives, we can go forward from there. But that would be helpful if you do have any.
I think I would like to suggest that it is important to have a policy that guides us. And if this one isn't meeting exactly the needs, there's no giant rush on this.
No.
So let's bring it back.
I think it's a meet and confer issue. It needs to go to the union.
I'm wondering if it's more of an internal with the employees rather than the board. That's the priority would be the employees, how they channel their communication to you. If they're coming out to outside board members, and there's a problem there. I mean, I don't talk to them. I don't talk to anybody. Once in a while I call to transfer you, and everything I send to Andrea is via email, so there's a trail.
Yeah.
But I don't talk to well, maybe Julie if I have messed up my payment or something. So that's it. So that's why I feel that this is a bit, it feels like there's something underneath that's not being addressed, and I'm thinking that the employees, it's more of an internal employee issue more than a board problem. So that's I'm done.
I suggest we have, if anybody wants to rewrite this and submit it, and see if we can craft something that's, I don't know.
Yep.
Whatever.
So if we can just defer it till the next time, and if.
I would want to get some direction to staff, if you can. Our standard practice would be to take the feedback from the discussion and direction, modify, make any edits, bring it back to you. What I'm hearing this evening is, in this case, I guess I'm unclear. Should we assume that we, for the time being, let's just table this topic?
Yeah.
Would you like us to bring it back in the near future?
I'd like to see it go to the union. I think it's a meet and confer issue.
Not yet.
Doesn't,
If it
Not
isn't
until we
acceptable
decide
to the
what we
board,
want.
why send it to the union?
The policy, anyway, so
I mean, my only other thought would be that maybe it's some of the details of this, and maybe we move out to sort of broader principles, like
Yeah,
it
that's
is,
what I was thinking.
it is the board's expectation that the primary contact with the agency be through the general manager with, some limited exceptions, and, we acknowledge that the general manager should be handling staff issues, and if someone goes outside of that chain, we, seek to get it back in that chain. I mean, there's a way to just make it more platitudes, I think. Not to say that I don't know if it would trip up the same concerns, but I don't know. If you'd like to have somebody work on that kind of thing, I would be happy
I'd
to
like
do
to see
that
it
over
come
time.
back.
and actually, just to state the obvious, these are intended to be your policies.
Ours.
We're
Not my
facilitating.
policy.
We're facilitating the drafting of these. But these are labeled board policies because they're ones that you as a board hopefully can embrace and follow. If they don't, then we move on. These are not staff policies. These are meant to be things that you feel are good guidelines for you as an elected body. If they don't fit that, then let's move on. Yeah, this is us bringing you ideas. It's not us dictating to you. So feel free to make
Shall we
changes.
table it for the time being?
Have
We
other
table-
ideas.
Yeah.
Table
let's
it
just
for the time being.
Table it for the time being, and we'll come back to it.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
In order to table, you need a motion and a second
Okay.
to vote.
Now, there's informational direction on, no, discussion direction.
Is there a motion to table? You just can't wish a table. Doesn't work that way, Counselor.
We didn't give
You
any
can move to
direction.
table it, but I think what Greg is looking for is direction from the board on whether to table it or whether to move forward.
Well,
If there's
table-
an idea besides tabling it, then let's bring that up, but otherwise,
I'll make a motion.
if you want to make a motion,
I'll
go ahead to make it
motion
to make it crystal
that we
clear.
table it for further discussion.
I second that.
All in favor? Aye.
That seems internally inconsistent, that we table it for further discussion.
We table it for further review.
Okay.
Is that okay, Pamela?
Well, but even that.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
So-
I
think we're going to
so we will-
submit like your written.
She doesn't.
Let's move.
Set this aside for another day. Thank you.
Item number 12,
Right now.
discussion on new performance metrics, monthly reports for operations and maintenance.
But there was no vote on that motion.
Let's go back, let's be very clear. There was a motion and a second. Can you call for the
Okay,
motion, please?
all in favor?
Aye.
Very good, we're done.
Okay. Item number 12. I'm sorry? Are we done?
I think,
Okay,
Item
we're moving on to item number 12. Discussion on new performance metrics, monthly report for operations and maintenance.
Okay, so this is a discussion item only. It's really just informational for the board, but we wanted to bring you this as the first phase in the efforts that we're undertaking to update our periodic reporting and metrics to assess how the agency is doing. And this springs directly from one of the objectives that we established in the draft strategic plan, which is underlined there just to make it very clearly what this is trying to address. And one of the goals we have as an agency is to make sure that we have regular processes to use select metrics and regular performance reporting to assess the efficiency and the effectiveness of the operations, business services, and customer services of the district. So this is a very, very important element that we're trying to bring into the district's business, where we have a select set of meaningful metrics. We know what they tell us and what types of information or decisions we're utilizing from these reports. And they also are, wherever possible, tied to objective benchmarks that we can utilize to say, okay, how are we doing in this area? So this month, this is really the first cut at this report, and future versions of this will address areas besides just operations and maintenance. We'll address basic HR, financial, capital project delivery, and so forth. But this is the first cut. So I want to walk you through just very briefly the metrics report, and also note that what you're seeing in this report is all information, or to a large degree, this is information that we now have readily available because we are very, I'd say, we're nearing full implementation of our use of the computerized maintenance management system, the CMMS. So that's been roughly a 4 to 5 year effort at this agency to implement CMMS. I think to everyone's credit, we're basically really hitting a sustaining level on that. And so this is the type of regular information and analysis and hopefully meaningful assessments that we can be doing on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis on a set of topics. So I'm just going to briefly go through. You can see that we start with pump stations, and this is, you have a table and a graph that just is a very basic snapshot of the core mission of this district. What this district does is we are here to collect and convey wastewater to the treatment plant for treatment. That's our service. So this is the highest level basic measure of that. It looks at things like the total volume for the month, the average daily dry weather flows, the peak wet weather flow events for the month, It looks at trends over basically a rolling 12-month window, and it's intended to help us answer some very basic questions about how we're doing, what is, in a sense, the demand for our service, if you want to look at it that way. Some notable things here, average dry weather flows, we're in the middle of winter, so they're a bit higher on an annual basis. They're closer to about 4.5 to 4.8 MGD, but right now the average dry weather flows are still high because of the saturated soil. We had a peak wet weather flow of just over 11 million gallons per day, which is relatively, I'd say, very modest for this agency. And we had a peak wet weather to average dry weather ratio of about 2.0, 2.05. That's a general indicator of the impact of I&I on the system. And if you look at the rolling 12-month trend, right off the bat, and some of the board members have already observed this, and staff have done the same thing, you can see some general trends, such as during wet weather flows, the Ross Valley Sanitary District's relative percentage of total flows to the treatment plant goes up, whereas it's generally stable during dry weather. So that's not something we didn't necessarily already know, but this is something that we can assess in the future and say, do we still see that pattern, or are we making headway in reducing I&I? Under maintenance, we are able to now show with a very high degree of specificity virtually all of the system cleaning throughout the district is scheduled and tied to a very detailed planning calendar built into CMMS. We don't just go through and rotate top to bottom of the system anymore. Every pipe in the system has an assigned cleaning frequency, either high frequency, which is anything more than every 6 months, annual, 3-year, and 5-year. And it also has an assigned cleaning method, so we assign the equipment. And we also quality control the results now through we do a substantial quality control video sampling of the cleaning done each month. So what this is able to show us, I'm actually jumping ahead, I apologize, I just realized I'm talking about line cleaning, but the same basic everything I've said basically applies to the pump station maintenance as well. Within the pump stations, all of the equipment has been cataloged, all of that information has been put in the CMMS. If a pump has a 3-month requirement to have a bearing checked, we now have that. It's built into the schedule, work orders are produced. And at a very high level, we're able to tell you that 94% of all of the scheduled preventative maintenance on all of the pump stations was completed this month. And that number will vary, but it tells you, did we get to none of it? Did we get to all of it? Well, we got pretty close. We got to about north of 90%. And then it also lists for you some of the major activities that went on with the pump stations. In this case, you can see those listed where we've replaced sensors or we've done significant motor maintenance. And then lastly, on pump stations, we address energy usage and the average energy usage in terms of conveying the wastewater flows. These numbers in isolation don't mean much. The fact that we used 68,000 kilowatt hours of energy in that month, and it took us 400 kilowatt hours per million gallons of wastewater conveyed. But in the future, as we look at running trends, we'll be able to see how we're doing in terms of increasing energy efficiency, reducing the impacts of I&I, and that 407 will have more context because we may have months when it's higher or lower than that. So in most of these cases in the future, you're going to be seeing roughly 3 to 6 month trailing trends to help put these numbers in context. Next was what I had already jumped to a moment ago, which is gravity sewer lines, and this is an area that I want to recognize staff's work on this. This is an incredible challenge for wastewater utilities. We have 200 miles of pipe in the ground. It is all in varying conditions. It all has pros and cons in terms of different cleaning frequency and methods. Do you use a rotter? Do you use a jetter? At this point, through all the analysis and all the work that's been done over the past couple of years, every pipe in this system has an assigned cleaning frequency, has an assigned method, and it has verification and quality control follow-up to make sure that that method works. So what this is showing you is, relative to that fairly detailed plan, how did we actually do this in the past month? And in this case, a couple of notable things in that month. The majority of time went to high frequency cleaning, almost 3/4 of our staff resources in the field for this. That will change in the future. We were doing some catch-up that month because we had gotten behind for a number of reasons. And you can see very clearly in this particular case, in this past month, we had no pipes scheduled for 3-year cleaning. That's why it's 0. In future reports, you may see substantial mileage under the 3-year column, and that would indicate whether or not we had gotten this. But the real takeaway there is, as early as or as recently, I should say, as 3 to 4 years ago, like many other agencies, our approach was both very simplistic and very ineffective. It was start at the top, work your way to the bottom. When you get to the bottom, go back to the top and start your way through again. So it reflected none of the best practices of risk assessment, condition assessment, verification of cleaning efficacy, and so on. So I know that's a bit of technical jargon, but the point is, in terms of being able to show the public that this district has a very effective maintenance and preventative approach to cleaning those sewers, and we're doing it in the most efficient and effective manner, the answer is right here. And this is similarly, this is very useful information for the regulators. It's how we can show very clearly and directly to the regional board staff that we have a very solid handle on how we're maintaining the system and that we're taking reasonable steps to reduce the SSO risk. You'll see, again, running trends on this in the future. Condition assessment is another item that's ongoing at the district, and it's a highly variable one because we have hundreds of spots that, under the regulatory order, we have to go back to on an assigned minimum frequency and reassess. So our cleaning crews have to keep track of a very complex and very dynamic set of information out in the system, and that's what this is capturing to help them do that. This is basically showing you that out of our condition assessment resources, basically about 70% of it this month went to the maintenance-related inspections. We weren't supporting capital projects, et cetera. These percentages will change in the future, and that's kind of a theme of all of this. The approach is very, very dynamic, and it's very needs and risk-based driven at this point. The next section is service calls. Very important. We roll every day on service calls of any nature. We don't know until the crews get there. It could be a broken water line, it could be a private sewer, it could be a public sewer that we're responsible for. But we roll on a substantial number of calls, as you can see, and now we can show you very clearly every month what those are for and what staff resources they take up. So we spent a little over 230 hours in that month responding to service calls. And you can see that many non-district issues do take up staff time. That's okay. When someone calls with a sewer problem, we tend to roll first, investigate, and ask questions after we've stabilized and responded to any emergency. But again, that gives you we'll be able to trend that in the future to see how we're doing.
So there were actually 10 public SSOs and 13 private SSOs, or calls?
These are just calls that we responded to, right, and our crew's assessment when we got there was, okay, we've gotten here, we've assessed it, turns out it's a private property sewer overflow, okay, we're going to back out and take off. So we rolled on 13 of those during this time period. And so, again, just kind of going on, the pie charts are meant to show you how that, the left-hand chart is the number of incidents. The right-hand chart is the actual use of district staff time to respond to that. So interestingly, for example, just to pick something here, the public sewer SSOs were about 25% of the calls, but clearly they're more like half of the district resources, because when we determine it's a public SSO, of course it's our responsibility and we assign resources. So those will change in the future, just giving you an idea of the type of information we'll be tracking and what types of decisions and assessments we can use it for. The last section is one that I know is maybe of greatest day-to-day interest or long-term interest, which is how we are doing on the reducing the frequency and volumes of sanitary sewer overflows. And I find personally this is a very useful snapshot. I think it's going to get better as we go on. But you can see, starting with the first table, this is the month of February, which wasn't the wettest on record, but it also wasn't quite a drought. We had a total of 10 SSO incidents. 3 of those were Category 1, 7 of them were Category 3. We had a total volume of 2,200 gallons, et cetera. This is over the course of the entire month of February. In the future, you'll see trends on that, and we'll see how we're doing in terms of making progress on SSOs. SSOs by cause. This is very important. We do not want to go out and blindly chase every aspect of SSO prevention. We want to put our resources where the greatest return is. Well, this is showing us some trends here. Where are the sources of our SSOs these days? Well, they're not typically wet weather driven any longer. They are often caused by structural defects, which we're addressing in the capital program. Fog, fats, oil, and grease. Interestingly enough, this data shows that even though it's a fairly modest number of incidents related to fats, oil, and grease, if you look at the pie charts, over half the volume resulting from the SSOs is related to fats, oil, and grease. So if we're looking to refine our targeted approach, do we want, this is the kind of information that will help us do that. Similarly, roots, we've had a lot of discussion about how to begin addressing preventative root control. This sort of shows us, well, how big of a problem is that? It's about 14% of the incidents, and it's less than 10% of the volume. Doesn't mean it's not an issue, but it does help us decide what level of resources we want to put our next focus into. And then the last table, we thought it was just a helpful measure of, in a sense, how are we doing collecting and conveying the wastewater and not letting it leave the system in a manner that it shouldn't. And in the month of February, we had SSO volume of 2,217 gallons. And to put that in context, the agency conveyed 168 million gallons of wastewater to the treatment plant. So, it's about 1/1000th of 1% of the volume wasn't properly handled and resulted in an SSO. That may or may not be a very meaningful number. We thought it was just sort of thought-provoking, so we put it in there. It would be somewhat analogous to if I was a water utility and I produced 50 million gallons a month of drinking water, and my customers only used, they used 49. Okay, that tells me how much of my product is getting to the customer and how much is getting wasted. If I produced 50 and my customers only used 25, that'd be a bit of a red flag. I'm losing half the water. This is a similar kind of measure. We had 168 million gallons of stuff we wanted to move, and we moved about 2,000. We lost about 2,200 gallons of that in SSO. So again, this will come back to you in the future with expanded sections, and you'll have a quarterly version that will look different because the quarterlies and the annuals will tend to focus on trends, not so much snapshots. And I expect staff, and as we collectively make refinements to our maintenance and our preventative cleaning program, these are the dials and the metrics, in a sense, that will help us assess how we're doing. So, with all of that, I also want to recognize the work that Steve Mixis and Catherine have done on all of this. We initiated this on pretty short order in the last 2 months, and because of the past investment in the CMMS and all the work that agency has done, we were able to start producing this type of report fairly readily. So we think it goes a long ways to help us address problems on a more objective basis and not just what's the crisis du jour, let's go chase it. And it helps us hopefully make a decision. So, send it back to the board. Any questions?
Before we just, thank you,
Yeah.
really.
Well, we like it, good. We think it's very helpful, but
You couldn't have done it without us.
Well,
Our input.
I think this came out of Frank wanting to see these graphs for a long time. I won't say how long, but a long time. So, and I'm hoping now that you have a template, putting it together now, you could just roll it out every month, right?
that is correct. You'll see
Awesome.
modified
I think
versions
so.
of this each month in the future, and again, similar quarterly reports.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, and it's so easy to understand, and you slice the data every which way. And so I think it's something that can become part of public outreach also.
You can't produce this until you got the data. And
Right.
with the CMMS system, we finally have that, so really amazing stuff.
Maybe we could do a link on the front of our website that goes right to this
To these?
report every month, so the ratepayers could see what's happening.
I think the information is really terrific, and the presentation is really easy to follow, and, you know, it really works. I think it's a great job.
Good.
And you're probably going to add the lateral program?
Yeah,
maybe?
almost certainly. That'll be one of probably the next immediate sections that we'll add to the monthly report will be the lateral work. And it will cover, I would expect, 3 to 4 key aspects of that. The volume of work, the number of grants.
Yeah, and maybe feet of sewer.
Feet of
type
sewer,
things.
certainly.
Yeah.
Feet of lateral replaced. Yes.
Cool.
Any other comments on this?
Just a couple comments.
Wait, Frank still has a couple to go here.
Sure. I'm glad we're finally getting some of this information, and I've been trying to get some of this information for a long time. It predates Greg Norby that I was trying to get some of this information, so. What we need also is to include the amount of pipe we're putting in the ground at some point. So, we're rehabilitating, we're putting in new pipe, and as Tom mentioned, the laterals, this is all good information for us. One more thing that we need is the number of hookups. How many new hookups did we get for the month of February? How many for the month of March, et cetera, et cetera? So we can kind of understand. I know in our financials, it looked like our hookups were up, but I have no idea how many hookups we had.
Right.
I get the information from CMSA
Yeah.
quarterly, but it'd be
Yeah.
good for this board to know
Absolutely.
how many new hookups we have.
And that's, we have that information available because we issue the permits and so forth, and we obviously set up customer accounts.
Mhm.
And it's just a good basic measure of, what's happening with our, with our customer base, so.
I remember about several months ago, there was a really good report on the lateral program. It was
Right.
probably 3 or 4 months ago.
Right.
It was an excellent report.
And what I think, I recall exactly what you're referring to, Tom, and that gives you a sense, that report gives you a sense of the amount of information that we're already tracking on the lateral program. It's very extensive and will produce, I don't know that it'll look like that because that was a very specialized report.
Yeah, it was.
Several pages just on that
Summarize
topic.
it.
But the key, there's probably less than, say 6 to 7 at the most metrics that would give us a very clear snapshot on the lateral progress, I say on a quarterly basis. So we're definitely anticipating bringing you that in an updated version of this.
I think Mr. Lamb had a...
Yes, thank you. This is very cool. Colors and graphs and, charts.
That really was that was our objective. I mean, the direction we went from as a team was we wanted meaningful but clear and simple information, and that meant graphs and tables and charts, not a lot of words.
So a couple of questions. One is in the SSOs by category, it says 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
and I have no idea what that means.
We
So
could-
maybe perhaps adding a sort of a descriptor.
Okay.
So category 1?
Key or something.
Yeah.
Yes, when we report out, there's certain requirements to the state for reporting and to marine environmental health. So category 1 is any water, or they call it the molecule rule, that hits a waterway. So even if I have a 1 gallon spill and it hits a drainage ditch which goes to any flowing creek, that's be flowing, it's category 1 right away. And there's a lot more, the reporting section on that's a lot longer. Category 3 is anything that just hits ground in less than 1,000 gallons. And category 2 is something that's greater than 1,000 gallons, but it does not hit a waterway. So what we do, and there's all kind of, I can go on for hours.
Yeah, so however you might want to,
No,
condense that into a meaningful.
Because I had the same question. You just,
descriptor.
2 lines will
Sure.
do it.
Right, and then the other one was on the service calls. there's a category of general, and I'm curious what that is, and the fact that it did involve 28 staff hours, which is not insignificant to me, it seems. So that would be another, I don't know how you would do that differently without getting too, into the weeds kind of thing. So that's
Examples of general might be, so,
For instance, a lady called this morning and said, hey, you guys are in our backyard, you left the gate open, potentially, can you come over here and check out any potential deer here to eat my flowers? We go out there, we check it out, she's all happy, we go home. So, but we do get a lot of these calls,
Yeah.
Because I can look at the CMMS right there, yes, my guys were there that day. We're gonna go out there, no problem. But
Yeah. And that's really, that we have such a great wealth of information now in terms of where the resources are going, and we can ask those kinds of questions. So, for example, Steve, if that number were 50 or 60 hours or whatever, something that said, oh boy, hold it, why is this going on? And before, we had a lot of very general impressions and well, this is what we've always done, or what have you. And this really breaks it out and lets us say, well, okay, is that reasonable? What can we do to fix it if it's not? I look at this, for example, and say, okay, well, gosh, if we only had one pump station alarm and we spent 2 staff hours on call-outs related to pump stations in the month of February, is that correct? I mean, that is saying, wow, the district has made tremendous progress on the reliability of its pump stations, because in the past, order of magnitude, Steve, in a given
during
month?
February, at least 40.
Okay, so call it
30 to 40.
30 to 40 calls will we roll on alarms from pump stations in prior years. And we are going through a wet weather period, the month of February, to be down to 1 pump station alarm for that month is now we can see it. We're like, oh, okay, we have obviously, I think it's fair to say, made really notable, meaningful progress on improving the reliability and the operations of the pump stations, where we don't have staff rolling 30, 40 times a month. And in terms of resources, those are overtime hours, those are people coming from 40 minutes away because it's the middle of the night, and that person comes down here, goes out, et cetera. You get the point. It's a lot of resources when we're doing 30, 40 calls on overtime hours and so forth. So these are big, big changes that we're able to track now more accurately.
Terrific.
Okay.
Thank you
All
again.
right, well, you'll see future versions, so thanks for the feedback. All those are good things we can incorporate into the future reports.
To make sure I get this in the right order. We got some informational items here.
Verbal report.
Yeah, okay. That's how I wanted to make sure I got this first. Verbal report by board members and request for future agenda items. Boy, can I just give a shout out again. We put in 6 smart covers. Cost us about 30 grand to do it. And I watched one of them get put in, and they are amazing, the technology. And last weekend, not last weekend, but the weekend before in Heather Gardens down here, there was an incident where we got an alarm from one of because of the smart cover technology, that there was a problem happening. And I'd like Steve just to talk about it and just real quick what we found.
We just had the smart coverage for about 6 days, and I was in my office. All of a sudden, my text goes off. I get emailed. There's an alarm at Heather Gardens on Diane Lane, and I go look at the data. I'm like, oh gosh, something's wrong. And it was during a heavy storm, so I was like, that manhole's notorious for overflowing. We rolled out. Turns out that a water main, a 6-inch water main, blew out 3 feet away from our line. So it surcharged our line and almost overflowed at Diane Lane. So we were able to respond earlier. We were the ones that actually notified MMWD. They saw the pressure loss, but they didn't know exactly where it was. So we ended up helping another agency, and the technology actually helped us stop an overflow. So it was make a difference.
Paid for itself. I mean, seriously.
So when I think when Steve or others get that alarm, it's not just a dumb alarm in a sense. There's a problem. they're able to look at real-time trending right on their screens now and see, hold it, I can actually see what the water level is doing and respond in time. So, I mean, I think that's an incident where it's almost virtually, guaranteed that minus having installed that new unit by luck, we were headed for, a multi-thousands of gallons SSO in the middle of a storm.
The February report would have looked very different. So the pie charts would have been all.
Yeah, those charts would have looked different.
And it can undermine your pipe too.
It can
when
undermine the
water's
pipe and the
flowing in.
street.
Right.
There's a 7-foot hole there.
It was a crater.
There's a
Yeah.
crater underneath the,
Yeah.
so if you're walking down the street and you see one of our manhole covers there and it's got a Emerald City reflector on the top, that's one of our smart covers, and just feel real proud.
Please don't open it.
Yeah, don't open it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
All right.
Any other board members?
Yes.
Okay.
I went to the North Bay watershed. I'm just going to send you minutes.
Okay.
But there was a lot of discussion on flooding and climate change. They have great speakers. And also to remind you, on April 22nd is their big workshop, and they're saying it will sell out. It'll be in Napa, and it's on a Friday. Okay, items that I would like to see on their agenda is, and I brought this up before, it's streamlining our meetings. So they'll be live on the local television station. It'll be a few $100s, I think. It's not a lot of money. I think the problem is if there's another streamline going on at the same time, then they can't do it, I guess. But it's becoming more apparent throughout Marin. I think it would help the public come down to a meeting if they see some discussion, whatever. And we're really on the kind of a distance too from a lot of the community. So I don't know. I just think it would be a great idea. The Sunday hour was at 9 o'clock. I haven't watched one recently, but yeah, the volume was really bad. So anyway, I think streamlining would be awesome. Even the LAFCO meetings now are streamlined. Okay, second agenda item is the Lifeline. And then Greg and I did talk a little on the phone, and I still think it's in the works. It's just a very
Yeah.
long road
Yeah.
to the end process.
We've
or-
got some feedback from the board last time when we gave you some very rough financial projections of what that program might look like. And the direction we got was, okay, this sort of goes forward incrementally, and maybe go back and develop some of the administrative alternatives of how this would be implemented. For example, is it done through the county of Marin, an adjustment on the final tax roll? So there was a lot of administrative basic process questions to answer. We've spent some time looking at other agency programs to see how they're doing implementing it. And the goal was the intent is to bring back, bring this back for discussion in the future where we can talk about the administrative structure and also revisit for the board, I think, anything new we've learned or might be the same information regarding the financial projections. But generally the financial projections, I think, gave everyone some pause and raised some, questions about, okay, it's a policy question, but the short answer is yes, it will be coming back.
Okay.
And again, and it's not just, I think, as everyone knows, with the transitions at the district, we are having a tough time getting to all the things we'd like to, so.
Yeah, well, that's why we need 2 meetings a month.
Yes.
Like we had for years, but that's okay. All right, so then the other question I have is, I still want the outreach committee to do a project, one project, something, I don't know what, anything, revamping our website, send out a mailer on education. What you just did with these graphs and everything is great information for the community. It's positive, it's, the rates are going up every year. I want the community to understand what are we doing, where is this extra money going? So and I'm sorry, I'm not gonna let that one go. And then last, there's been the Larkspur Landing remediation. I was talking to Frank, I think on this next meeting when we come back, I would ask that we meet on our committee before we come to the board, so we can kind of overview everything, because we've had now 3 board meetings, I believe, discussing this. And so we have not had a meeting for it's been a long time. That's it.
I've got a few. I want to
Okay.
hear a few. Yeah, we discussed earlier the cost to pump and treat our wastewater, and for the past few years, we've been talking about a wastewater reduction and conservation program. The district helping to fund gray water system for single-family homes, waterless urinals for commercial buildings, and it's actually gone nowhere.
Well, just as a point of correction, I mean, we did bring you a draft agreement that was ready to go with MMWD to participate in funding, amongst other things, waterless urinals, et cetera. And this board decided to decline to go ahead and approve that agreement.
No, I thought we were going to do our own. I thought we were going to do a real wastewater reduction program rather than, they just wanted us to help subsidize their program. But the more wastewater we can reduce coming through our system, the more money we're going to save. That's what that's about. And especially with, gray water systems are pretty popular right now, if someone will fund it. The other issue is Herbsberg. He's a senator, and he's got legislation. I don't know if it's been approved yet. That's the one that's going to mandate 50% of all wastewater being reclaimed and recycled or reused by 2026, 100% by 2036. This is going to impact CMSA, of course, much more than it's going to impact us. But the fact is, we have a lot of saltwater intrusion, and we had the study by Yost that said, we've got some severe problems here along the boardwalk in the Riviera, where rain events and high tide were sucking in bay water and then pumping it over to CMSA, and they're treating it and dumping it in the bay, and low tide it goes back out, and high tide it comes back up here, and then we suck it in again and pump it back over. I mean, it's kind of a round robin. And so in order for CMSA to meet some of these standards, they're either going to have to do a desalination plant over there, or perhaps we can get some of the salt out of our system. And West Joe's really pointed out to us the problems, but we've never addressed it. So I think we need to address that issue that they brought to our attention. I know when I spoke to them when we were trying to get a state grant. I was trying to get a state grant for some rehabilitation work here, and they said they thought it'd be about another $75,000, and they could really zero in on the issue and come up with a solution. But of course, that needs to come to the board if that's really what they think is possible here. So I think the board needs to deal with that. I noticed in Vivian's report, we talk about the population of the Ross Valley Sanitary District being 55,000. And that's the number we used to use when we had San Quentin. San Quentin's gone; it's not ours anymore. So probably if we got there's 4 cities. If we got their population from each city, there's 2 fire districts and some unincorporated areas. So we could probably come up with a pretty realistic number there for this says 55,000 customers. We don't have 55,000 customers.
No.
It may be thinking of 55,000 population, I guess, but it's not 55,000 population either. So we need to get some realistic figures for that. That's all.
Okay. I think actually I know that's kind of a recurring item, and what I'm going to do is we'll follow up with the Marin map team. So the Marin map is, I think they're kind of the intergovernmental GIS cooperative, involves a lot of different agencies. So right now, there's not a lot of reason to leave that as a guessing game or to rely on secondhand information. We can take, for example, simply the most recent census tract data, which is very, very, highly detailed spatial, what are called census blocks, which are almost analogous to city blocks. And there's really not much stopping us from just stop using general numbers sample the latest census data. It's exactly aligned up with our defined LAPCO boundaries, and count the head count that's nailed in the census and use that number. There's really no reason for us to be using these broad secondhand numbers any longer. That ability's been around for 20 years now. I don't know why we don't, other agencies and others don't use it. So we can just simply give you specific numbers once a year, based on the state or the federal census data, so.
Well, for incorporated cities, probably about 36,000. So, I mean,
Right.
we get those numbers right from them.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
anything else? Let's close this meeting. Adjourn.
Thank you.